Sex is fun. We know this because it's something most of us look forward to doing. There are proven health benefits from having sex, but can too much sex cause you to die? How much is too much? The answer to these questions might just save your life. Too much of a good thing can be bad for you. This includes sex. There are some things to keep in mind when being intimate with your partner. Obviously, you should always communicate clearly, and sex should be something both parties enjoy. If you don't know if your partner is enjoying sex as much as you are, then ask. If you don't know what your partner likes or dislikes, ask. If you don't know exactly what you are doing during sex, ask. It's okay to not know something about your sexual partner, but communicating has been shown to increase the pleasure for both participants. That being said, if you and your partner enjoy having sex all of the time, what are the downsides? And how much sex can you have before it becomes life-threatening? First, let's start with the negative side effects. Sex has many benefits, but can be painful sometimes. This is especially true when two people have a lot of sex in a short amount of time. Sex takes a lot of energy, and most of the time causes an increase in heart rate, muscle activity, and sweating. Therefore, you can kind of think of sex as a really fun workout. Just like when you're working out at a gym, you need to stay hydrated and not overextend yourself. Otherwise, you could pull a muscle. In extreme circumstances, you might get a really bad cramp or a charley horse, which can be incredibly uncomfortable even during the pleasures of sex. When you sweat a lot, your body loses water and nutrients. Every time you have sex, you probably break a sweat, which means you should be hydrating before and after. When you sweat, the fluids lost need to be replaced. If they're not, your body could become dehydrated. It would be incredibly difficult to dehydrate yourself to death solely from having sex. However, if you tried really hard, you could probably do it. Besides overall dehydration, there could be dryness of specific areas of the body that are frequently used when having sex. In particular, this thing can happen to the vagina. Both men and women can and should get pleasure from sex. However, the female genitalia can get dry from prolonged and frequent friction during intercourse. When this happens, micro tears can occur in the vagina, resulting in discomfort and, if not properly treated, serious pain. Other painful side effects can occur if the female can't replace the fluids that serve as natural lubricants due to dehydration. This is not uncommon after long bouts of sex for females to have chafing, irritation, or rashes to develop on and around the vagina. If you're engaging in a lot of sexual activity, it may be good to use a lubricant to ensure that the pleasure continues for everyone. On the male side of things, ejaculation can begin to take its toll on the male body if it happens over and over again. Having a lot of sex over the course of a weekend could cause sore testes. Overexertion of any body part, including genitalia, can cause discomfort. However, these things will not kill you. If you're going to be having lots of sex in a short amount of time, just make sure to take rest breaks, stay hydrated, and use a lubricant. A lot of lubricant. Another negative side effect of having too much sex could be a UTI. UTI stands for urinary tract infection. At a very basic level, a UTI is when bacteria that's not supposed to be in the urinary tract gets into it and starts multiplying. This can happen in the urethra, bladder, or in more serious cases, the kidneys. UTIs normally are just extremely uncomfortable, but in severe cases, they can be dangerous. That's why if you have a UTI, you should go to the doctor and get antibiotics to kill the infection. UTIs can occur as a result of sex if you get too dehydrated, so this is another reason to drink lots of fluids if you plan on having a lot of sex. However, there is something else to keep in mind to reduce the risks of getting a UTI or other infections. As fluids from the male or the female enter the vagina, it can cause the natural pH levels to become unbalanced. This can also lead to infections or discomfort. Imbalance of pH levels can also occur in the male urethra when there are multiple ejaculations over a short period of time. In order to reduce these risks, both males and females should go to the bathroom following sex. This flushes the urinary system and helps remove fluids that have entered these areas during intercourse. It's important to note that it does not matter your sexual preference, whether you're straight, gay, polyamorous, or anything else. If you're having lots and lots of sex, you're susceptible to all of the discomforts that can become associated with such a lifestyle. Again, a UTI and unbalanced pH most likely won't kill you. However, it's not completely impossible that you could die from a really bad infection or extreme dehydration, but this probably isn't your biggest concern in terms of what could kill you from having too much sex. You and your partner will definitely want to take care of your bodies to reduce discomfort and have a pleasurable experience, but you probably don't have to worry about dying from sex quite yet. Research around deaths during sex has led to some interesting findings. One surprising statistic has come up again and again in different research studies. A very high percentage of men who die during sex are engaging in adulterous behavior. In other words, men who are engaging in extramarital sexual activity naturally have a higher death rate during sex than men who are faithful in having sex with only their spouse. Now, this is not because the male's partner walks in on him having sex with someone else and murders him. Instead, it has to do with other physical conditions that we'll discuss later. But the fact remains, men who died during sex were more often than not cheating on their significant other. In some studies, the number of cheaters in sex-related deaths could be as high as 82 to 93% of the total cases. And these numbers are consistent around the world, suggesting that being an adulterer anywhere comes with an increased risk of dying during sex. In a study in Japan that looked at 34 deaths during sex, 80% of them were men who died while having sex outside of their marriage. In Korea, a research study in 2006 found that 93% of cases involved adultery. Another study in 2006 at Goethe University Frankfurt in Germany recorded that out of 68 men who died during sex, 10 of them died with their mistress and 39 died while having sex with a prostitute. This means that almost 75% of the total number of sex-related deaths in the study were adulterers. So why is having a lot of sex outside of your relationship more dangerous than with your partner? It seems very unlikely that the high percentages of sex-related deaths by adulterers across different parts of the world are just random coincidences. In these adulterous relationships, the lover might be much younger than the adulterer. This may not be surprising, as men who engage in sexual activity outside of marriage or a relationship tend to be older, and their sexual preferences probably aren't aligned to their age group. As mentioned before, sex can be taxing on the body. A lot of calories are burnt and a lot of fluids are lost, and it can be comparable to working out. So if one of the participants is severely out of shape or is older, this can increase the odds of death during sex. In terms of adulterers, something else might play a role in the high sex-related death rates. It may not be the physical toll the act of sex is taking on the body, but the mental toll. A study from the University of Florence in 2011 found something very interesting in the 1,700 people that participated in their study. People who were having sex outside of their marriage or relationship had almost twice the amount of cardiovascular disease as those who were monogamous and faithful. The conclusion of the study was that deceiving your partner sexually could lead to a sense of guilt. This psychological burden could increase stress levels and may be connected to a higher risk of cardiovascular complications. Up to this point, it would seem that the safest way to have lots of sex is to make sure to take care of your body, stay hydrated, and don't cheat on your partner. So, what actually causes death of people during sex, and how much sex puts you at risk of dying? The most common reason that someone dies during sex is because of a heart attack. This is not surprising because of the sudden and increased physical activity that occurs during sex. If you go from a state of relaxation to having sex, your body needs to exert a lot of energy. In order for you to maintain a high amount of energy, your heart needs to pump blood quickly around the body. If your heart can't handle the strenuous activity, it could lead to a heart attack. Can too much sex kill you? Yes, it can, but only under very specific conditions. Studies found that people are 2.7 times more likely to have a heart attack during or immediately following sex than when they are not engaged in strenuous activity. How do you protect yourself from a heart attack-induced death during sex? You need to take care of your body and exercise regularly. Death during sex usually occurs in people who are overweight, older, or do not exercise. This is because having sex is taxing when done right, and it takes a lot of energy. Just like with other forms of exercising, you're more likely to get injured if you try to do too much too fast. If you're planning on having a lot of sex and you've not exercised in a very long time, you should begin exercising immediately. Sex is not always planned, so if you're having surprise sex and do not live the healthiest lifestyle, make sure to start slow, drink lots of fluids, and don't overexert on the first go. If you do find yourself planning to have lots of sex, there are risks involved if you're not in relatively good health. Experts recommend that people who do not live the healthiest lifestyle and want to improve should begin an exercise program slowly and gradually and increase intensity over time. The same advice goes for people who do not have a lot of sex and want to start having more. Start slow and work your way up to avoid cardiac arrest during sex. Can too much sex kill you? Yes, it can, but most likely it won't, unless you're reaching an older age or already have serious health issues. If you're in these categories, you should always exercise more to decrease your chances of a heart attack during sex. Experts also warn that it is possible to have too much sex. Normally, when two people do this, it is to avoid conflict, or having to do things that they do not like to do, like cleaning the house or getting work done. If sex is getting in the way of your other responsibilities in life, maybe dial it back a notch. If you're having lots of sex and have no problems with getting everything done, good for you. Just remember that death via heart attack from too much sex can occur. So keep up the healthy lifestyle, always stay hydrated, and don't be afraid to take a break once in a while. Imagine doing something boring like riding the subway or typing away at an expense report, and suddenly your body sends you a very clear message. You need to have sex. Not like a sex fantasy about someone you're attracted to. Rather, you get an intense feeling in your genitals that can only be relieved by sex. You try to ignore it, but it's not going away, and it doesn't care how inappropriate it is for the moment. For a small number of women, this unfortunate situation is reality, and it's one of the rarest and newest sexual disorders out there. Titled Persistent Genital Arousal Disorder, it's not just a one-time thing that makes itself known at an awkward time. This disorder causes sudden and persistent genital arousal without any current sexual stimulation or desire. This unknown disorder was at first mistaken for hypersexuality by puzzled doctors who assumed that this was normal sexual desire gone out of control. But examining a few people who suffered from this condition indicated that it was completely separate from sexual desire. This has led researchers to wonder if the name is appropriate. After all, the women aren't aroused, they're being troubled by a nerve reaction in their genitals that's giving them sensations they don't want. One thing is for sure, the women experiencing this condition all report the symptoms are extreme. When describing the symptoms of the disorder, arousal is the furthest thing from the minds of the sufferers. They feel intense pressure and irritation in their genital area, which can lead to contractions or vaginal congestion. Sometimes spontaneous orgasms can happen, but not in all cases. Sufferers sometimes try to relieve the pressure by masturbating and triggering an orgasm, but this only lasts a short time, if that. Many sufferers report having to have multiple orgasms in a short time to experience any relief, not something that's feasible when it occurs in the middle of a workday. So what causes this bizarre disorder? There are so few cases of persistent genital arousal disorder that no definite cause has been determined yet. Studies indicate that it may be exacerbated by stress, but that's probably not the source of the problem. Originally, doctors assumed it was psychologically based, but attempts to treat the condition through counseling didn't show results. Now it's believed the causes might be neurological or vascular, with conditions like Tarlov cysts or arterial malformations in the pelvic region pressing on a nerve that causes this unusual condition. So what's the solution? The women suffering from the condition are desperate for a cure. Treatments have varied, and so has the success rate. Most early cases were treated with a combination of psychotherapy and pelvic exercises, and while the therapy may or may not have been useful, some women report relief from the exercises. In cases where a physical cause can be determined, some minor surgeries have relieved the condition by removing the pressure, but the disorder isn't fully understood yet, and no one's quite sure why a medicine called varenicline, normally used to treat nicotine addiction, relieved one woman's symptoms. But mainly women suffering from the condition have a bigger problem: getting anyone to take them seriously. When Jeannie Allen came down with the syndrome in her mid-40s, she was one of the first people ever diagnosed, and she immediately found out that her condition would make her the subject of mockery. One of the first doctors she talked to even commented that she must be every man's dream, to which she snapped back that he should try to imagine what it would be like to have an orgasm every minute of the day. She was so frustrated that she eventually went public under the pen name Jean Lund, and became one of the first people to ever share exactly what it was like to live with this condition long term. She described it as taking the joy out of life and leaving her unable to concentrate on anything else. Another woman, a 40-year-old flower vendor who became the subject of an early clinical study, reported that the episodes happened spontaneously with no trigger and left her exhausted and unable to plan her day effectively. She had previously had an attack of the condition 7 years before and found relief after a surgery that removed a ruptured ovary. But now it was back, and the doctors were as clueless as she was. They tried the medicine carbamazepine, an anticonvulsant, on her, and she stopped after a month due to lack of improvement. However, in her case, supportive therapy sessions seemed to do the trick as they reduced the frequency of symptoms, and she was eventually able to resume a normal life. Causes might vary, but one medical condition repeats as likely cause of the condition. What is a Tarlov cyst? The human body is sensitive with a lot of little areas that can go awry, and even the smallest problem can have unexpected consequences. The Tarlov cysts are tiny cysts in the spinal canal near the base of the spinal cord and are known for their walls filled with nerve fibers. First discovered by Isidor Tarlov in 1938, he at first assumed them not to cause any adverse symptoms. However, future investigations indicated they can cause pain, spasticity and muscle weakness, headaches, and bladder dysfunction, among other symptoms. They can wreak havoc on the nervous system and create unpredictable symptoms, including genital dysfunction, as they happen to be right by the nerves that affect the genitals. When Professor Barry Komisaruk, one of the first researchers investigating persistent genital arousal syndrome, looked at the MRIs of sufferers, he was shocked to discover that 2/3 of them had Tarlov cysts. So there may finally be hope for the women being driven crazy by this strange disorder. 11 women with the disorder had their Tarlov cysts operated on by Dr. Feigenbaum, a spinal neurosurgeon who had been studying the disorder. They became part of a case study on the disorder, and when they were interviewed after their recovery, 8 of the 11 said their symptoms had gone away. The remaining 3 reported significant relief from before surgery, and this was the best evidence yet that sacral nerve compression was the root cause of the disorder. But not all cases of the disorder have the cysts, and not all people who improve have the surgery. And for Jeannie Allen, these advances weren't much help. She never had a Tarlov cyst, and doctors were at a loss for how to treat her. She eventually quit her job to dedicate herself to advocating for more research and support for women with her condition. Despite the growing awareness, it's still a very rare disorder. While it's believed hundreds of women may suffer from the condition, case studies have only looked at a population of under 30 women. How is the growing awareness of this disorder helping these women? For the first time, women suffering from this strange disorder have a source for help other than doctors who may not fully understand it. They can find fellow sufferers online to learn how they've been coping. This allows them to try various solutions including exercise, meditation, and medication that may or may not be helpful. While many find surgery as a solution, local anesthetic hasn't been successful in preventing the disorder. While the intense feeling is concentrated in one specific area, it doesn't originate there. It's generated in the nervous system, and any solution has to go deeper than skin deep. Persistent genital arousal disorder only affects those with a certain set of equipment, so those with the other set have to be breathing a sigh of relief, right? Not exactly. There's a similar condition that affects men, and it may be even more challenging and uncomfortable. It's called priapism, and it causes similar persistent arousal of the genitals that manifests as a prolonged, uncomfortable erection that persists even in the absence of any stimulation. Most men remember that awkward moment when you really can't stand up because the bulge in your pants has decided to make itself known, but this is an extended erection that can make it difficult to walk, urinate, or concentrate. Like persistent genital arousal disorder, it can be caused by a number of things, including sickle cell disease, nerve damage, drug use, or trauma to the penis. Another reason to be wary of getting kicked in the genitals. So is there any good news for those suffering from this uncomfortable condition? Well, priapism is more common than persistent genital arousal disorder, and doctors know a lot more about how to treat it. Unfortunately, it also carries more health risks. An erection that lasts too long can cause serious damage, as many ads for erectile dysfunction medication have warned. As most cases of priapism are caused by the inability of the penis to drain blood properly, the most common treatment is to numb the area and drain it with a minimally invasive procedure. If blood drainage isn't a problem, treating it can be as easy as a cold compress. But in a worst-case scenario, surgery may be performed, and the clock is ticking. Permanent damage can begin after only 4 hours. It's an embarrassing but not uncommon medical problem. It's estimated that it may occur in as many as 1 in 20,000 men a year. These have got to be some of the strangest sexual disorders to encounter, right? Not quite. Doctors have encountered some genuinely bizarre sexual disorders, some of which they don't have a real answer for yet. One of the most troubling sexual disorders is retrograde ejaculation, which has terrified quite a few couples. In this disorder, everything goes perfectly normally until it's time for the guy to ejaculate. It feels like everything went fine, but nothing's come out. This is a rare disorder caused by a malfunctioning valve between the urethra and the bladder, where the semen doesn't travel down the escape hatch and instead shoots backwards into the bladder. It can make it difficult to conceive, but doesn't really have any serious health risks. The usual culprit? A side effect from medication. There are a few other things better than post-sex bliss, right? Not for the people with the next condition. Post-orgasmic illness syndrome is another condition that's puzzled doctors. For those few men suffering from it, whenever they ejaculate, they immediately come down with a series of flu-like symptoms. That pleasant feeling of an orgasm is immediately replaced by a feverish feeling, a runny nose, and the intense need to lie down. Not exactly a happy ending, and the cause might be even more bizarre. According to Dr. Marcel Waldinger, one of the few doctors to study this condition, the men might be allergic to their own semen. This has led doctors to experiment with a cure by injecting these men with a diluted solution made from their own sperm. Most of these conditions only manifest during or after sex, but this next one might be painfully obvious much earlier. Phimosis is a malformation of the foreskin surrounding the penis that makes it too tight, essentially forming a band around the tip that can make sex or any other pressure on the penis extremely painful. the disorder exists from birth but only becomes obvious when someone tries to have sex or masturbate. The good news is this disorder isn't nearly as mysterious as others. It's a simple skin problem and can be corrected by a circumcision procedure that's slightly more extensive than average, removing all the foreskin instead of only a part. The biggest challenge for the sufferers? Going to the doctor and admitting this embarrassing problem. The next disorder might sound less terrifying than the others, but it can make for some awkward conversations. Due to a problem during the development of a fetus, it's possible for male children to be born with two penises, called diphallia. This is a rare condition that's most surprising for the fact that in some cases both penises function for both urination and ejaculation. One is usually smaller than the other, but that's the only distinction. The disorder can also manifest as a part of larger developmental abnormalities that require surgical intervention, and each case is handled independently as doctors figure out an approach that'll lead to the most normal life for the affected child. It's rare for adults with diphallia who have not had the condition treated to be found, so unpleasant surprises in the bedroom are unlikely. With many sexual disorders like persistent genital arousal disorder, doctors are often unsure of whether the cause is physical, psychological, or due to side effects from an exterior stimulus. That's why those suffering from these rare disorders often find that their fellow sufferers are the best source of information as everyone tries to puzzle out these weird quirks of human sexuality. Addiction. It's when something that started as normal use becomes a compulsion that slowly consumes your life, with the desire to get more occupying your every waking thought. Most addictions are to a substance, with the most common being nicotine, alcohol, and various drugs. The common treatment is to go cold turkey with a support system that keeps you from relapsing. But what happens when your addiction is to a basic biological imperative? That's sex addiction, and it's surprisingly common. A compulsion to have sex is nothing new. Everyone's familiar with the sex drive, also known as the libido. A combination of biological, psychological, and social factors, the sex drive is driven by a combination of neurotransmitters and hormones including dopamine and either testosterone or estrogen. Production of these hormones varies in different people, and some people may have a much higher sex drive than others. So, what sets sex addiction apart from a high sex drive? Well, that depends on who you ask. Scientists differ on whether seeking sex compulsively actually qualifies as an addiction, and it's not a clinical diagnosis in the DSM yet. However, other mental health experts have observed a surprising number of people who have trouble controlling intense and frequent sexual desires that lead to self-destructive behavior. The team behind the International Classification of Diseases did create their own category for it, officially titled compulsive sexual behavior. So how many people are battling sex addiction? Well, that depends on how you define it. If you consider everyone who's dealing with sex-related issues, that number could be as high as 16% of people. But if you look at more severe symptoms and try to pinpoint a definition of sex addiction, it's closer to between 3 and 6%. That's still a lot of people who haven't had a name for their condition until recently. And one thing stands out in many studies of sex addiction: men are almost twice as likely to develop this addiction as women. So what causes sex addiction? Is it a purely psychological condition, or is there something deeper at work? Scientists have looked at many possible causes. Psychologists have observed that those who display symptoms of sex addiction often begin their sex lives at an early age, and many have experienced serious trauma as a kid. That leads to many to believe that it's an unhealthy coping mechanism for people who never had the opportunity to develop their sex drive at an older age. And getting to the root of the trauma and addressing it may be the best treatment approach. Others argue it may be a symptom of borderline personality disorder, which many people with a tendency toward promiscuity are diagnosed with. Others argue that it might be an imbalance in natural hormones and neurotransmitters causing the addiction. Those taking medications that affect their dopamine production have been observed to develop a syndrome that can result in compulsive sexual activity or gambling. So, how to research this condition beyond talking to people who experience it? Time to call on the researchers' most reliable tool: rats. Compulsive sexual behavior isn't exclusive to humans, as anyone who's seen a bunch of wild rabbits would know. Scientists studying rats that display compulsive sexual behavior have observed that this behavior is driven by the same mechanisms in the brain that affect drug addiction. This is the clearest proof yet that sex addiction is a genuine addiction, but it's complicated by the fact that sexual addiction is not an outside stimulant. It's a natural instinct that acts as a positive reinforcer. Naturally perceived by the brain as a reward, it triggers the instinct to seek it, and the brain responds accordingly. Finding the line between the natural desire for sexual activity and the emergence of an addiction is one of the biggest challenges facing researchers. And that's one of the challenges facing sex addiction sufferers too. Where does the line change between a desire and an addiction? As more sex addiction sufferers come forward, a portrait is emerging of people whose desire for sex takes over every single part of their life. Most sex addicts don't have any physical symptoms, so there's no withdrawal period due to the lack of chemical addiction. The symptoms are mostly emotional, and many report that their fixation on sex makes it impossible to concentrate on anything else. They're thinking about sex when they go to work or school, when they're driving, even when they're trying to fall asleep at night. When not having sex, they report feeling empty. That leads them to seek out or stay in relationships that may be far from healthy. Being in a relationship for a sex addict is tricky in its own right. The best bet for a sex addict to have a healthy relationship would probably be to find someone else with a very high sex drive so they can keep each other satisfied, but that's treating the symptoms, not the addiction. It's very easy for that relationship to go off the rails as soon as they're separated, because sex addiction is an insatiable beast. When an addict's first choice for sex isn't around, they might quickly slip into bad habits. That can include having an affair or seeking out a sex worker, either of which could not only destroy their relationship, but leave them and their partner vulnerable to sexually transmitted disease. Making it trickier, sex addiction is a disorder, but it may be one of many. People have come forward with addictions to many different types of sex, some driven by the digital world we live in. Some people have become addicted to masturbation, becoming obsessed with pleasuring themselves even in inappropriate situations. A prominent journalist was recently caught masturbating on a Zoom chat. He claimed he thought it was off, but that didn't save his job. Others report an addiction to pornography, which is easier to get than ever thanks to the internet, although it does carry the risk of a very different kind of virus. Others have a compulsion to expose themselves in public or spy on others, which can lead to serious legal trouble. These are all related to sex addiction, and people can have one or more, which can often mingle with other addictions. Treatment and support are available now, but it wasn't always that way. As sex addiction becomes more recognized as a disorder, many sex addicts are coming forward with their stories of just how far they would go to satisfy their urges. Many are just starting to dig out from all the relationship, professional, and legal trouble their addiction caused them and are sharing their stories in anonymous forums. One man was so fixated on sex that he would patronize online hookup sites for anonymous sex. This obsession became so strong that he eventually started skipping out on his job in the middle of the day to meet up with partners. This continued until he got caught up in his latest hookup and missed an important meeting. A quick dismissal from his job soon followed as he hit rock bottom. Other sex addicts use their addiction to cover up for other stressors in life. A successful businessman's marriage was already in trouble when he started giving in to his compulsion to hire prostitutes. It didn't take long for his wife to figure out a lot of money was going missing, and she demanded he stop. So he promised he would, but he actually started opening new accounts, hiding his money, and getting deeper and deeper into the world of compulsive sex. And that's only the start of the trouble sex addicts can find themselves in without treatment. Addictive behaviors often go together, and people who are susceptible to one are vulnerable to others. One woman had a stable relationship with her husband until he wanted their active sex life to involve drugs. At first, she agreed, but his drug use grew out of control and put them both in danger. She pulled away, but he got sucked deeper and deeper into his addiction and concealed his addictions from her. Another man was used to drinking pretty heavily as part of his social scene. He liked to ask random women for selfies and use them as his personal connection for pleasuring himself. He built a massive collection thanks to lowering his own inhibitions by drinking heavily, and didn't realize how out of control he had become until his daughter discovered his secret collection and was horrified. Other sex addicts find themselves hitting even lower rock bottoms as they get arrested for soliciting sex workers or having public sex. Others contract sexually transmitted diseases that they then spread quickly as they move through sexual partners. The good news is, there's more help now than ever before. So what's the best treatment for those struggling with sex addiction? Many sex addicts seek counseling, but the counseling field is still split on whether sex addiction is a real diagnosis. The official regulatory bodies for sex and relationship therapy haven't accepted sex addiction as its own disorder, so the job of counseling those with sex addiction usually falls to experts of another sort, addiction specialists. While these counselors may not have much experience with sex addiction, they've counseled countless other people on how to handle addictions that are consuming their lives. Cognitive behavioral therapy, which is common for treating other addictions, has been used to help sex addicts learn coping methods and behaviors to control their urges and keep them from disrupting their lives. But there's another key element often missing from treatment: support. Ever since Alcoholics Anonymous was founded in 1935 by Bill Wilson and Bob Smith, anonymous groups where addicts can share their stories and offer support to those struggling have been a cornerstone of addiction counseling. The programs have since expanded to groups supporting those struggling with addiction to narcotics, gambling, and overeating, as well as groups for family members supporting their loved ones with addiction. Multiple groups dedicated to helping sex addicts have emerged, including an online forum named NoFap and several in-person support groups. But there's just one problem. Not all of them agree on what the best approach is. Sex addiction is a newly diagnosed disorder, and there's been relatively little research done in it compared to other addictions. That means different groups interpret the best way to help addicts differently. The most famous group, Sexaholics Anonymous, has a strict definition of sexual sobriety and helps those who want to go cold turkey on casual sex, pornography, and masturbation. Others, like Smart Recovery and Sex Addicts Anonymous, have a more flexible definition and help their members find a balance that gets their addiction under control. Many people who don't have any of these groups in their area attend Alcoholics Anonymous meetings without sharing why they're there and try to apply the 12 steps to their own addiction. But what about those who are struggling to get their addiction under control? Getting a major compulsion to a manageable level can be a long process, so many counselors are taking another step to protect their patients as they recover. Because many sex addicts engage in risky sex with people they don't know, some take pre-exposure prophylaxis during the early stages of recovery. This drug, covered by most insurance plans, is a preventative measure that helps to prevent HIV infections. It's favored by people who aren't ready to go cold turkey on their sex habits, but want to avoid infection while they work toward recovery. Is society ready to address the topic of sex addiction like they do other addictions? Indications are mixed. Sex addiction first became known as a term in the 70s as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous tried to apply their 12-step program to those struggling with compulsive infidelity. But many people still argue over the classification of the disorder. Some worry about the risks of classifying sexual activity as a disorder and argue that it could be used to stigmatize people with healthy, active sex drives. Others argue that it's not an addiction at all, but rather a form of compulsive behavior and should be treated differently. But even as the controversy persists, the disorder becomes more well-known. Movies like Shame, Diary of a Sex Addict, and Don John help to raise awareness and give people compassion for those troubled by the disorder. The number of support groups is growing, and those seeking help for sex addiction are finding more people who have battled the disorder to welcome them as they start their own fight. Picture a guy from the US who's decided it's time to spread his wings and get out of the town he's pretty much never left. He heads to some distant land he knows absolutely nothing about, and from the moment he gets there, he's somehow incredibly popular. No sooner than he's learned how to order a bottle of beer in the local language, he's hooked up with someone. But as some of you well-traveled viewers might know, what happens in the bedroom in the United States might not happen everywhere. This guy soon finds himself completely out of his depth and wondering what he's gotten himself into. Make sure you don't make the same mistake by watching this to find out some of the most confounding sexual practices you've ever heard of in your life. Let's start in Indonesia, where there's a pilgrimage people take to a place called Mount Kemukus, aka Sex Mountain. Every year, folks from all across Indonesia head to this part of Central Java for, you guessed it, sex. But it's more than just that, it's sex with a complete stranger. As the story goes, a long time ago a prince eloped from his town with a woman and tried to have a fun time there. They didn't quite finish the job and were chased away by soldiers and later killed. A kind of ritual has since emerged, which involves going there and meeting a stranger. Only this time they do what the prince and his lover couldn't and finish the job. And that's not all. They must continue to meet up and do so 7 more times throughout the year. If they end up fulfilling the quota, they'll then be blessed with good fortune, which we're sure is the only reason that men and women flock there, married or not, to hook up with a stranger. If you're thinking, no way that's a real thing, think again. In 2014, the governor of the province of Central Java laid down restrictions on what happens there. He banned the practice, saying it was not moral and there was a risk of contracting various diseases. He also said it made Indonesia look bad in the eyes of other countries. We'll let you decide if he was right about that last part. Still, Indonesian news reports in 2017 said the stalls and huts erected for the deed had reopened, and people were getting it on for good luck once again. You see, the business had been booming there before it was all closed down. Many people enjoyed the freedom of the ritual, and in turn, that provided lots of business for locals at Sex Mountain. When the ritual was banned, they lost their means of making money. The entry fee alone was around 50 cents, which doesn't sound like much, but on good nights there were about 8,000 pilgrims. In the past, when all huts and stalls weren't around, the people just did it behind trees, so you could call the enterprising locals a good thing for everyone. They even opened karaoke stalls to perhaps get people in the mood. You might wonder if the fortune actually does shine down on the pilgrims after their year of hooking up is over. Well, one woman who'd partaken told Australian News, "Praise be to God, after coming here, even though I have a few debts, my business is making a bit of a profit." Next up is a nomadic tribe in West Africa called the Wadabi. They don't have a written language themselves, but this word has been translated as people of the taboo. What's taboo in many parts of the world is having more than one marriage partner, which is known as polygamy. This tribe doesn't mind at all, though. In fact, they embrace it. Every year, there's something called the Gariwal Festival, and during the big party that happens, the guys get dressed up to the nines to show their beauty. In fact, this tribe might just think it has the most beautiful men in the world. These people are also what you might call especially liberated, having no qualms about the very natural things that often makes Westerners blush. The men, with painted faces and feathers on their head, dance and look wonderful for the onlooking women in the tribe. It's said they take a kind of drink that helps them to dance for hours on end and also provides a hypnotic effect. It's like a very colorful beauty contest, because then all the women will choose the most attractive men. If the women are partnered with someone already, no problem, they can put themselves forward as someone who wants to steal another man as a new husband. If they don't want to go all out and steal a guy, they can just elect to sleep with him. If the guy walks past her, she just needs to brush him on the shoulder and they will be together. It totally doesn't matter about the previous partner. The guys don't get much say in the matter, though. There are some rules, however. Usually, when a woman is old enough, an arranged marriage will take place. Once she becomes pregnant, she goes to live with her mom and can't see the husband. After some time, she can go back to him, but she might just decide during the festival to sleep with another guy or steal one. One tribesman told National Geographic, "We get to go to the Giriwal for pleasure. I get a woman, then fine, it's a bonus." When a guy is incredibly hot, he's called Keijo Naado, hurting man, because he's so gorgeous it hurts to look at him. And just to set things straight, you have the word polygamy, which means marriage between more than two people. Then you have polygyny, which is when a man has more than one wife. And then there's polyandry, when a woman has more than one husband. It's not all that common, but it happens in various parts of the world. It's somewhat different from having a mistress, though. In Thailand, a man may often take what the Thais call Mia Noi, which literally means small wife, often called a second wife by Westerners. It's not actually legal in Thai law, but you have a documented marriage and you also have an undocumented marriage, in which a wedding ceremony still happens, but nothing is officially signed. In the past, when women have had fewer opportunities, this was widespread, but not so much now. In 2021, a video went viral in Thailand that features a man secretly marrying another wife. The guy in question, a cop, got the shock of his life when his real wife's mother-in-law walked into the ceremony and gave him a hard smack across the head. The attending monks were less than impressed, but despite the chaos, the ceremony went ahead. His real wife, who later showed news cameras their marriage certificate, was understandably angry, seeing as they'd been together 15 years and had 2 kids. Believe it or not, in the past, Thai women's magazines would say tolerating such a thing was the mark of a good wife. Maybe a small wife might be too much, but many Thai women have turned a blind eye to a man for having what you might call a bit on the side. That's what Thais call a gik. To understand this, you have to understand what some Thais now think of as outdated traditional values. These old values held that there was something called kulasatri, which meant an ideal woman. She was demure, quiet, and certainly wasn't outwardly sexual. She wasn't even meant to have sexual thoughts. Meanwhile, male masculinity was defined by something called chai chatri. Under this, men were supposed to have irrepressible, uncontrollable sexual desires that could never be limited to their one spouse. It doesn't seem fair to most of us and wouldn't be seen as fair by most modern Thais either, but it still happens, quite a lot. This is evident in a Durex poll that had Thais top of the infidelity ratings, and before you ask, this has nothing to do with Thailand's notorious red light districts, which only actually make up a few streets in the entire country. It's actually these old cultural values that pervade most of the nation and lead to a culture of infidelity. Not to say women will tolerate cheating these days, or at least the majority of women won't. That's perhaps reflected in the fact that Thailand is arguably the leader in penis reattachment surgery. This has led to the international media asking why Thailand has an epidemic of penile amputations. There's even an old saying men sometimes say to other men, about which goes, "I better get home or the ducks will have something to eat." The men are often hypocrites too, given that many men have a zero tolerance when their ideal woman cheats. It can often and does regularly lead to him killing her. You might wonder why the second wives marry the guy. It's often down to financial security or just the security of keeping him. The first wife might not want to break up with the guy, either because women divorcing men is frowned upon in traditional settings, or because she has limited opportunities in life to take care of the family he'll leave behind. The woman whose mother whacked the cheating husband was well aware he had a gig, but she turned a blind eye to it. She told reporters, "I initially did not think that my husband would wed. Before the wedding, he was still staying at home with me, and he told me he would be going out to work a night shift at his station." In some cultures, having more than one spouse is not just accepted, it's normal. Academic studies, for instance, have shown that in parts of India, China, and Nepal, a woman might have more than one husband. One such paper published in 2019 was titled "Marital Satisfaction and Well-Being Among Fraternal Polyandrous and Monogamous Tribal People of Kannar." Fraternal polyandry is when one woman is married to 2 or more brothers, and Kannar is a district in northern India. The paper concluded this after spending time with some of these families. The result, based on qualitative research, revealed that polyandrous couples' physical health, economical, and psychological well-being is better, and they feel positive toward life. But why is that? The paper said those families felt secure together and they had financial security. It said a woman in those tribes with only one husband felt less financially secure than a woman who had married 2 or more brothers. The brothers also said they felt more secure. The Toda tribe of South India have also practiced these kind of marriages, but that may have now stopped. Still, it was explained that when a child is born to one of the brothers, he would hand the wife a bow and arrow and become the father of the child. If another child was born to another brother, he would do the same. In certain regions of India, Nepal, and Tibet, various practices of polygamy happened throughout history, although it's not common now. In a northern part of India called Jansarbawar, in some places a woman would marry the eldest son and then she immediately became the wife of all his younger brothers. It got tricky though, since the brothers could have more than one wife if their older brother was much older and the age difference was vast between his brothers and the wife. In that case, a brother could find his own new wife. If all the brothers stayed together with the one wife, none of them had any kind of exclusive right to her. All brothers were seen as equal and the kids looked on them as one father. In some countries in the recent past, such as parts of Tibet, the eldest brother would be seen as the main husband. A study published in 2008 said among the villages of Shigaz and Kamdo in Tibet, it was found that 20 to 50% of families were made up of a wife and 2 husbands. In some more remote areas, the researchers said 90% of the families were polyandric. To understand why, just imagine how difficult life is in some of those unforgiving mountainous areas. Weird to us maybe, but arguably an act of survival for others. Laws in Tibet have long since made it illegal, but the marriage will sometimes be documented between the wife and just the eldest brother. In most countries, a man's member is kept locked firmly behind closed doors, where it's barely noticeable unless he's wearing his favorite pair of tight Speedos. In some of the more remote parts of New Guinea, though, that's not always the case. There, the penis can have its own clothing accessory. This is called a koteka, which looks something like a gourd and covers the penis while being strapped to the waist. It can be long and thin or short and wide and can point in any direction that the wearer chooses. Obviously, when a man is working, a smaller koteka would be preferable. But if they're worn as a way of attracting a female, though, it's still up for debate. It might be only worn as a way of covering up as well as a way of looking good. Still, you have to wonder if some women favor a bigger koteka. The Sambia people of Papua New Guinea are heavily focused on what you might refer to as the warrior culture. When the boys are very young, usually around the age of 7, they're taken away from their mothers. In some ways, this is to toughen them up, and there are some comparisons to the training known as paides in the ancient Sparta. But with the Sambia, it's because the boys need to be detached from what's believed to be the contaminated blood of the mother. It's said that in each woman there's something called tingu, which has the power to manipulate men. When the boy gets a little older, he might be around younger women who also have tingu in their blood. Since her tingu gets stronger during her menstrual period, during that time a woman is kept away from males completely. Okay, so if women have this sorcery that they can use to manipulate men, how do couples ever get together? Well, when the boys are old enough, they are taught how to safely have sex without being trapped by a woman's tingu. One way is to kind of disassociate himself from her and not get too heated in the act of sex. He should also try to prevent her from enjoying herself too much, lest she make him become sick and he possibly die. Once copulation is over, he goes through a bloodletting ceremony which is supposed to decontaminate him of her tingu. This happens until she gets pregnant, and then after she has the child, he can become a fully fledged warrior. In the 1990s, people who visited these very remote tribes said times were apparently changing though. Supposedly something called love marriage was occurring from time to time. And in those marriages, they didn't include all the fear and ceremony we've just described. In a 2006 book, the writer called this shift nothing less than revolutionary. While many of us take kissing for granted, this romantic, full-on, juices shared, lips-bitten kind of affair is utterly disgusting to people in some cultures. Researchers at the University of Nevada explained that when the Mehinaku of Brazil were asked about kissing, the general reply was that it was gross, with one asking, "Why would you want to share your dinner with someone?" Fair point, and let's be honest, no one wants to see anyone devouring each other's tonsils on the subway. In another paper, researchers found in some other cultures that there was no kissing at all. The Aka Pygmies didn't do it, and when questioned about sex, they said it was basically to make a child and nothing more. One person referred to sex as a night's work. According to the website This Is Africa, the Tonga tribe in Mozambique think much the same way, saying kissing is unhygienic, and when they see Westerners do it, they just think about someone eating dirt. And the last, but certainly not least strange romantic custom comes from Iran. There they have something known as Saihohu, which means a man and a woman can have a temporary marriage, explore each other's bodies, and if after some amount of time they decide they're not right for one another, they can annul the marriage with ease. You might ask why someone would do this, and doesn't it sound a lot like short marriages in the US? Well, for one thing, this marriage might only last for an hour, or perhaps a day, or maybe even a few days, which even in the US would be very unusual. You see, in Iran, just getting it on with someone you aren't married to is considered sinful and also illegal. That's one reason why men meet women online and then they head to the city, get a temporary marriage, book a hotel room, do what they have to do, then get divorced. As human rights advocates have pointed out, since not being a virgin before marriage is also considered sinful, this can have negative effects on women in the long run. It's also been called a way of having legal prostitution. The Iranian cyber police have said some websites will even help with a match and then do all the paperwork for the marriage. They can even book someone a hotel. It's like Tinder, Airbnb, and a priest all in the same app. Saihohu is supposed to provide a way for a woman to keep her chastity since she is technically married when she has sex, but she still becomes stigmatized after. This is what one young Iranian man had to say about the practice. "If I temporarily marry a young woman for 3 years and then divorce her, would anyone be willing to marry her? It would be impossible that any man would want to have a family with this woman." Still, some Iranian women have happily made use of the law. One woman told the New York Times about her relationship. "We went out a lot together and I didn't want to get into trouble. We wanted to have documents so that if we were stopped on the street, we could prove that we weren't doing anything illegal." She and her husband renewed their marriage after 6 months and then they did it again. We don't know how things ended though. A British-Canadian woman in 2015 talked to The Guardian about her dating experience in Iran. She said she was hounded by police and others while out in public with a man, asking how they knew each other and what they were up to. She said, "In public, I had to face the opposite direction and pretend to read." She got a temporary marriage and said it actually allowed her and her lover to live a normal life. "It was like a bubble. We were in love and no one bothered us. It was beautiful," she said. A month later, and she was on the plane out of there. But there's a happy ending. It took some time, but he eventually moved to the UK and they were remarried in London, this time for longer than a day. Sex is everywhere. It's in the news, in the YouTube videos you watch, and practically every television show or movie you've ever seen. But what happens if you never have sex? Would you explode? Would you die? The answer might surprise you. Having sex definitely provides physical and mental health benefits for the participants, so it goes without saying that if you never have sex, you miss out on some of these advantages. Then again, if you've never had sex, you wouldn't actually know what you're missing in terms of pleasurable sensations. But even if you don't know what you're missing, your body does. It's important to remember that everyone is unique and everyone's body will react in different ways. But let's look at some common physical and mental side effects of never having sex. First, we'll look at the physical ramifications to the body if someone never has sex. There are a lot of misconceptions about what'll happen to your body from lack of sex, which we'll debunk later. But the truth may be even scarier. Men who have regular sex and ejaculate more frequently have a lower risk of prostate cancer. This means if you never have sex as a male, you're actually at a higher risk of getting prostate cancer. The reason for this is because humans evolved, like all living things on this planet, to be reproduction machines. Whether you like sex or not, your body's main purpose is to reproduce, because that's how all living things evolved. The body needs to release old sperm in order to create newer, more viable sperm. Just like with other equipment, if the male genitalia is not frequently used, there can be problems or a breakdown in the system. It's not yet clear what the precise cause of prostate cancer is, but studies suggest that men who have frequent sex or ejaculations tend to have a lower risk. So if a male never has sex, sex, he should be at least masturbating. This will be a common theme here, because some of the benefits of sex can also be obtained from self-release, but not all. Either way, if you're a male who never has sex, you should consider doing regular prostate checks. For females that never have sex, there are different repercussions to the body. Sex strengthens the pelvic floor muscles that support the bladder. If a female never has sex, they may find themselves with a weak bladder. This could lead to leakage or incontinence. Sex is a physical activity, and the muscles involved need a workout every now and then. If you never have sex, these muscles aren't exercised, which leads to them becoming weaker. Turns out that if females are not strengthening the muscles used during sex, it can lead to negative effects on other body systems. That being said, females can also achieve the benefits of sex from self-pleasure as well. It turns out that in humans, just simulating the act of sex can trick the body into providing many of the benefits associated with the act. Another negative effect women who never have sex may encounter is that the vagina may be drier than someone who is engaged in sexual activity. This is not necessarily a problem other than it can be uncomfortable. So if a female has never had sex and feels discomfort in her genitalia, it may be because of a lack of lubrication around the muscles and organs. Again, this problem can be solved by masturbating. At some point in their life, someone who has never had sex may want to engage in the activity. If this is the case, the lack of sex in previous years may hinder the carnal act. If someone has gone their whole life without having sex, it could take longer than expected for arousal to begin. This could happen because the body would be feeling all new sensations, and since they would be different than anything felt before, it could take a while for the necessary fluids to flow. This seems counterintuitive, since you would expect someone's body who has never had sex to be raring to go. However, the longer someone goes without ever having sex, the longer it takes for the body to prepare for the activity. Your body needs to create and dump hormones into the bloodstream, and then increase the blood flow to areas of the body that have never or very infrequently been used. This can take a while, especially for someone who has never had sex before. Whether someone is male or female, never having intercourse can be connected to higher blood pressure. There are several studies that show people who have regular sex tend to have lower blood pressure. Therefore, the opposite can also be true. Someone who has never had sex may have higher blood pressure than if they did have coitus. The most likely reason for this is because there is a correlation between having sex and the lowering of stress hormones in the body. If a person never has sex, those same stress hormones will be higher. Someone who has more stress tends to have higher blood pressure. This is a serious health concern a celibate person should be aware of. They should absolutely find other ways to lower their stress levels and blood pressure. Like we've said before, this can be done through masturbation, but there are other options as well, such as meditation. Again, our bodies evolved to be sex machines, therefore they expect to have a release every now and then. High blood pressure would definitely be a negative side effect of never having sex, but there is something else that sex might help your body with that you weren't even aware of. Having sex, or more specifically having orgasms, has been linked to benefits to someone's immune system. Psychologists Carl Charnetsky and Francis Brennan Jr. conducted a study where they took saliva samples from people who frequently had sex and those who did not, and found some surprising results. In the patients who were having sex, their saliva contained higher concentrations of immunoglobulin A, which is an antibody used to fight off the common cold. Therefore, there may be health benefits to the immune system of someone who is having sex. If this is true, then someone who has never had sex may find themselves getting sick more frequently than others. The reason for this boost in the immune system may have more to do with the close proximity to another human during sex than the act itself. So unfortunately, this boost to your immune system may not be something you can get from masturbation, since it's only a party of one. So it would seem that never having sex may have negative physical effects on the body, but what about the mental effects? Are the people who never have sex at risk of having higher mental health issues? Since everyone is different, there is no absolute definitive answer, but someone who has never had sex may be at a higher risk of certain negative mental health issues. As we said before, the act of having sex releases certain hormones that lower stress levels in the body. This can be achieved through masturbation as well, but another important mental health benefit of sex is the feeling associated with physical intimacy, something that cannot be obtained through self-pleasure. Someone who has never had sex before may develop what psychologists call skin hunger or touch starvation. This is when lack of close physical contact results in negative mental health issues. The intimacy during sex cannot be replicated even if someone spends a lot of time around other people. The physical contact and sensations during sex are sometimes necessary. If someone has never had sex, it could cause their body to react negatively to the lack of intimacy. It would not be surprising for someone who has never had sex to feel isolated or insecure. This could be caused by an imbalance in hormones in the body due to a lack of sexual contact. The change in chemical composition of the body from sex is not just because it feels good or pleasurable, but because it's something intimate and shared between individuals. If someone who has never had sex is feeling depressed or lonely, even if they're surrounded by others, it could be because their brain is craving intimacy. In these cases, we only have evolution to blame yet yet again. Our DNA is selfish and wants to be passed on to the next generation. Therefore, almost all of us are programmed to want to have sex. One way our body tricks us into copulating is by rewarding us not just with pleasurable physical sensations, but with mental stimulation as well. The brain of someone who has never had sex could be starved for intimacy of it. This, in turn, could cause negative side effects to mental health. So really, for someone who has never had sex, their brain begins to rebel against them. When your brain is fighting you, it's gonna be a bad time. However, as mentioned before, everyone is different. Some people actually don't need to have sex at all and are still healthy and happy. This can be because of a low sex drive or that the person is asexual. The human brain is a magnificent thing and can even overcome our biological urges in some people. In others, the brain may be programmed to just not crave sex, and for these individuals, never having sex most likely comes with no side effects. There are misconceptions based around what happens to someone who has never had sex. So let's break them down. Someone may have told you that if a female doesn't have sex, their vagina closes up. Not only is this untrue, but think of how many other complications that would cause for that person other than not being able to have intercourse. A female who has never had sex will most likely have a smaller opening to the vagina than females who are more sexually active, but there's absolutely zero chance the vagina will completely close up. Even females who have never had sex still produce sex hormones, which means that although there may be discomfort or negative side effects from not having sex, they are still able to do so at any point during their life. What it comes down to is that everybody's body is different. Some people may choose to never have sex and can still lead a long and happy life. They may have to find other ways to mitigate some of the negative side effects, such as lack of intimacy, but it can be done. We know masturbation can produce many of the positive benefits of having sex. There are some risks to never having sex, such as a greater chance of prostate cancer in men and incontinence in women, but we live in a time where there are medical options to combat these negative side effects. What'll happen to your body if you never have sex? It just depends on who you are. But for most of us, we'll feel discomfort, mostly in the genitalia, and we'll probably feel lonely or more stressed even if we are around other people. Sex is literally in our DNA, so although it may not be necessary, it could be hard to avoid.
As the Hollywood cliche goes, post-coital, some of us sit back against the headboard, proud of our accomplishment at gratifying our lover, spouse, or one-night stand, and then light up a cigarette. How was it for you? Good enough, you surmise, as you take a well-earned drag. Or are you the kind of person to roll over in an instant, perhaps leaving your bedfellow exasperated and hardly ready to catch some Z's? Or perhaps you spare just a moment reposing, and then compose yourself and start again. Do you cuddle up, have a chat, talk about deep things, or even request a favor of your lover? According to research, these are all common. But what happens to our bodies during and after sex? That's what we'll find out today. In this episode of the Infographic Show, what happens to your body while you are having sex? Today we'll talk about what happens to both men and women having heterosexual sex, and when we say sex, we mean intercourse, lovemaking, copulation, fornication, or as the Brits say, having it off. So, let's start with the man. What happens to him? At some point during sex, men reach a point of no return. This is sometimes called ejaculatory inevitability. Pulse rate and blood pressure rise, the sperm leaves him, and his penis has contractions. Now he can return to resting and let his body calm down, which apparently happens faster for men than women. The penis becomes flaccid, and most men will have to wait some time before they can go at it again, but it all depends on age, fitness, and of course the urge to return to the hearth of passion. Some guys at this point will just want to go to sleep. Is this plain rude, or is it a biological necessity? Well, listen up, disgruntled women. Science says it's natural for men to want to sleep, and for various reasons. Notwithstanding the obvious, in that it's often nighttime and tiredness might be normal, another reason is because upon reaching orgasm, men release lots of pent-up anxiety. So do women, and they might feel tired too, but it seems men sleep more after sex according to research. Another thing is brain chemistry. All these chemicals spill out in the brain when men ejaculate, including serotonin, oxytocin, norepinephrine, vasopressin, and nitric oxide. Some of these chemicals are related to de-stressing and the readiness to sleep. This can lead to that feeling of, phew, and then men want to relax just as they would after any strenuous exercise. It's kind of like getting a hit of morphine, and apparently that hit is much stronger when having sex than when masturbating. One doctor puts it like this when talking about the release of chemicals. They give you a very relaxed feeling, slow down your brainwaves and cerebral functioning, and make you feel pleasantly tired. But it's thought the hormone that is released called prolactin is the main reason men want to sleep. It gives you satisfaction, and the less of it you have, the more likely you will go for round 2 quicker. Really satisfied men may just turn over and start to snore. Another thing is that he might want to go for a pee. The reason? It's chemicals again. Oxytocin and prolactin affect the kidneys, and this makes him run off to the bathroom. Some experts also think it's to clean the urethra from bacteria, a kind of natural need. It might also just be because he's been holding it in during all that messing around. He then finds the pee won't come out. That is normal, because for the sperm to come out, your internal sphincter muscle clamps, and this is to close the bladder. This is to stop the semen from entering the bladder. In a recent article in Cosmopolitan magazine, it was suggested that men who want to cuddle are keepers, but it also says that men who don't might just be succumbing to their own body's demands. You might find that your penis feels a bit sore, but this is just normal after all that contracting. Don't worry, it shouldn't last long. And don't be shocked if your testicles have shrunk, because this is normal too. A doctor talking to Men's Health magazine explained it like this. When you ejaculate, the cremaster muscle contracts and brings your testicles up closer to your body, giving you the perception that they're smaller. Lastly, you may get a cramp in the toe. Apparently this happens a lot, but it's just because orgasm causes stimulation in the nerves, especially S1 in the spinal column, and that nerve affects the toes. If you look at some research, it also says some men's moods change dramatically after sex, but given the release of all that tension and all those chemicals flooding out, that's not so surprising. Some men have reported feeling emotionally handicapped after a great orgasm, and that's thought to be because huge amounts of dopamine were released. It's like coming down from a drug that makes you feel happy or ecstatic. In women, the feelings can be similar, as we shall see. So, what about postcoital women? Well, women may not always orgasm. According to an article in Psychology Today, which cited a number of studies, around half of women will regularly orgasm during intercourse, about 20% of women rarely orgasm, 20% consistently orgasm, and 5% never orgasm. When they do, it's different from a man's one great push to the sun, as women have what has been called rapid rhythmic contractions. This can be quite the event, and some women certainly show this in their face, sometimes looking like they've had an ecstatic experience. These shockwaves go through her genitals, her anus, her uterus, and her pelvis, and she too will have a magnificent rush of chemicals flooding through her brain. She may experience female ejaculation, which is when a milky liquid will come out of her urethra. Don't worry women, there's nothing wrong with this. But what about when a lot of liquid comes out? A neurophysiologist from Rutgers University in Newark says it's not the same milky stuff if it comes out in large amounts. In that case, she says, it is urine diluted with substances from the female prostate. Scientists are still not clear as to why some women do this and others don't, but it's certainly not harmful. So, why are women often up for a chat about tomorrow's activities or the meaning of life, while some men are already halfway to La La Land? According to a study in the Netherlands undertaken in 2005, women are more focused than men during sex, their minds completely set to the task of reaching orgasm. This is because their amygdala and hippocampus, which regulate feelings, kind of turns off. They are at one with sex, well, at least if they are fully immersed in it. Once we've come, we return to our bodies, our consciousness recalibrates, and our emotional intelligence returns, said an article in Bustle about this phenomenon. But after sex, they switch back. And it's then they get that lovely hit of oxytocin, sometimes called the cuddle chemical. One study found that people with high levels of testosterone release less of this after sex, and men generally have high levels. Some women do too, of course, just not as much. So men, next time you turn over, blame your lack of oxytocin. And women may not experience a refractory period at all. This is the downtime men need to get ready to do it again. Note, teenagers may not need much downtime, but then again, sex doesn't always last that long for these hyper-carnal kids. Women are multi-orgasmic and they usually could just start again. But be careful there, women, because sex can be more painful for you than it can be for men. Women might cramp up in the uterus, and this is due to the cuddle drug oxytocin. Let's now call that the double-edged sword chemical. There might also be some burning because of the vaginal tissues getting dry, but lubrication can help. The stinging doesn't mean there is a problem, but obviously if it persists longer than a day or two, it might be something else. And if men see shrinkage, then women see the opposite. In their breasts at least. Many women's breasts get bigger after sex, and in some women by as much as 25%. According to Women's Health magazine, just how swollen the breasts become differs from woman to woman. The same article also said a woman's clitoris will become very small at point of orgasm, almost disappearing. At the same time, women's nipples may become more sensitive, but this is very natural. Other reports say some women become giddy after sex, and others feel great confidence, seeing their bodies as much more attractive than before. Most reports we can find state that while some women may experience a slump after the sex, it's the men that really suffer from depression, sometimes a week long. But as the saying goes, what goes up must come down, and most of the time, it's worth the ride.
You wake up to the sound of shouting and screaming. Your girlfriend is pushing you out of the bed, demanding that you leave or at least sleep on the sofa. What's going on? You were fast asleep, minding your own business. Is she tripping or something? Hearing her voice go into high-pitched mode as she hurls accusations your way, your automatic reaction is to get defensive. Still, you try to stay calm and defend yourself. This has happened before, and you know how it ended last time. After a few moments, you take in what she's actually saying. She's claiming you were aggressively thrusting and trying to get fresh with her while she was asleep. Nonsense! You were asleep too. Maybe she was just dreaming, but she seems so convinced that you don't dare suggest it. What's going on? Sexsomnia is a rare disorder that causes some unusual sleeping habits. Whereas insomniacs have trouble sleeping, sexsomniacs engage in sexual acts while asleep. This is different from having a wet dream or an orgasmic experience during your slumber because the person engages in full-on sexual acts like masturbation or intercourse. When they wake up, they have no idea what just happened. Imagine you could lose your virginity and not even realize. Madness. It's also possible to combine this sleep sex with sleep talking and sleepwalking, so you could have the full shebang with some freaky outdoor sex outside and dirty talk. Madness! Having sex in your sleep might sound harmless or even pleasurable, but it can lead to some dire consequences. But first, let's look at the science behind this sexy phenomenon. Sexsomnia is a type of parasomnia, a term that encompasses all kinds of abnormal activities that can happen while we're asleep. Sleepwalking and sleep talking are the most common and well-known, but it turns out we can get up to all kinds of weird stuff. Sleep-related eating disorders make people binge eat while asleep. Confusional arousals aren't the weird stuff you're into that you shouldn't tell others about. They're also known as sleep drunkenness because they make us function at lower brain capacity and talk rubbish. And REM sleep behavior disorders see people fighting imaginary intruders or running away from non-existent monsters. Different types of parasomnia take place at different points in the sleep cycle. When we first nod off, we go into a light sleep for a few minutes. Then we enter the second stage of sleep, which is also pretty light and ideal for brief naps. In the third and fourth stages, we finally enter deep sleep, a restorative state that helps us boost our immune system, energy, and repair our body tissue. Afterward, we go into rapid eye movement or REM sleep for around 90 minutes. At this point, the brain becomes more active and we consolidate our memories. It's also the part of sleep where we dream. Most cases of sexsomnia take place during non-rapid eye movement or NREM during stages 3 and 4. Since these are the deepest stages of the sleep cycle and don't involve dreams, the mind can go a little crazy. The parts of the brain that control vision, movement, and emotion remain awake during NREM sleep, but the parts controlling memory, decision-making, and rationality are asleep. Yep, sounds like a recipe for disaster. Most types of parasomnia occur during NREM sleep, including sleepwalking and sleep talking, but there are also a few disorders that can happen during REM sleep. A key example is sleep paralysis, waking up paralyzed while partially immersed in a dream state, which is why it's so terrifying. Because sexsomnia occurs during deep sleep and we don't remember it when we wake up, it's difficult to diagnose yourself. Symptoms include heavy breathing, sweating, masturbating, pelvic thrusting, spontaneous orgasm, fondling, an elevated heart rate, and blank stares. To me, that just sounds like the normal state of a hormone-filled teenager, but there you go. Although we have a vague understanding of sexsomnia now, it's still murky on the details. What causes it? How often does it happen? We're still not sure. Naturally, it's pretty challenging for scientists to investigate sexsomnia. You can't just repeatedly make two people fall asleep together in a laboratory, hoping that eventually they'll have sex while sleeping, then repeat it with 100 other couples because you need a bigger sample size to reach any conclusion. We'll probably be in the dark about this one for a long time. However, there are some theories. Some researchers think the causes of sexsomnia could be exhaustion, alcohol, drugs, anxiety, or poor sleeping conditions, and sharing a bed with someone, although it's hard to ignore that one altogether. So, we can only assume that attempting to cope with the extreme stress by taking drugs, partying until the early hours, and getting into bed with your friend who has an uncomfortable mattress is a terrible idea and not a healthy coping mechanism. You learn something new every day. Even though it's notoriously difficult to research sexsomnia, a few cases have been found, and I'll tell you now, it doesn't end well. The first case of sexsomnia was reported as recently as 1986. That could be because humans are getting progressively hornier over time, but most likely it's just because nobody thought it was worthwhile to report before then. I mean, what person in their right mind would ring up their doctor after they masturbated in their sleep? You'd just shrug it off and go about your day, wouldn't you? Even now, only 194 cases have ever been reported, and there's very little information available about most of them. But in 2017, one man in the UK was successfully diagnosed after ending up in hot water with both his current and his ex-girlfriend. We don't know his actual name, so let's call him Bob. First, Bob crashed at his ex-girlfriend's house one night. It's not a good idea at the best of times, but in fairness to him, they had a kid together. What could go wrong, right? Turns out, a lot can go wrong. Bob woke up to find his ex screaming at him, accusing him of rape. He was confused and alarmed, believing he'd done nothing of the sorts, but decided it was best to leave promptly and let her calm down. It was probably a bad call to not talk it out and investigate further, because the incident ended with him being accused of rape and convicted as guilty by the jury. Still, Bob didn't understand what had happened and believed he was innocent. Then a similar pattern happened with his next girlfriend. The first night they slept in the same bed, she was annoyed to find him fondling her and thrusting in the middle of the night, but brushed it off and said nothing. Then, another night, after a boozy party, she was woken up in the middle of the night. She shouted at Bob angrily, angry that he'd wake her up and have such little respect for her boundaries. It was so out of character, too. He was usually so gentle and thoughtful. Much to her surprise, Bob seemed taken aback, confused, and denied anything had happened. Was he an evil gaslighting genius, or was there something even stranger going on here? Bob saw a doctor who pointed out the rare disease of sexsomnia. Suddenly, everything made sense. He wasn't a forgetful sexual predator. He'd literally been sleeping throughout all the incidents. To verify it really was sexsomnia, the doctor referred him to a sleep clinic in London where he could be monitored. The researchers put electrodes to his scalp as he slept to monitor his brain activity and found some surprising results. During the incidents, Bob was effectively both awake and asleep at the same time. The sleep cycle of regular people was out the window. There were both the slow brain waves associated with deep sleep and the fast rhythms and brain waves associated with being awake. They diagnosed him with sexsomnia. Another man from Scotland was cleared of rape charges after doctors diagnosed him with sexsomnia, but it's still a legal gray area for now. A woman sits down to write a letter to a magazine advice column. Her husband is in the room next to her playing Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War. Every so often she can hear him curse and shout, at which point she grits her teeth in anger. "He won't have sex with me," she writes, adding, "The few times we've had sex, and I can count those on one hand, I had to beg for it." She's hoping someone will be able to explain what happened to this guy. Today, you'll find out. The example we just used is real. The woman claimed in the letter that her husband had slept with her once in the last 7 years. Just like that, he stopped. When she asked him what went wrong, he just told her it just stopped working, meaning his John Thomas. He explained to her that this is what happens to men in their 50s. She didn't believe him, blaming herself and her weight gain. In the last paragraph of the letter, she wrote, "I'm isolated, bored, frustrated, lonely, rejected, unwanted, hurt, and angry. I'm sick of feeling like I'm selfish for wanting sex with my husband." Part of the reply she got was, "It's about your husband's failings as a human being, about his self-hatred, about his ineptitude and his decline." But what if he just lost his sex drive? Can that happen? Does it happen more to men than women? Who has the strongest sex drive in nature in general? What do we really want sexually? Those are some questions we'll answer today, among many other fascinating things we'll discuss related to men and women wanting or not wanting to get it on. But first of all, what is a sex drive? Another term for it is libido. You can't measure it. It's not an actual part of your brain. It's just a thing we talk about in reference to how much a person wants to have sex. All humans have these things called sex hormones, which regulate through biological processes our wanting for sex. If such hormones were absent or for some reason depleted, we might lose our sex drive. For instance, certain drugs can affect those hormones, such as some antidepressants. But there's more to sex drive than chemical reactions. There's the psychological side too, such as you feeling the need for sex because you've become very attracted to someone. If a person really attracts you, your sex drive might go into hyperdrive. Or for a woman, her sex drive might get into third gear right before she ovulates, when the egg is released from her ovary. That's because her testosterone levels change during this stage of menstruation. This drive develops when we're very young, before we really understand sex at all. Then, when we go through puberty, it really gets going. Ask any teenage boy who's had to do his own laundry for fear of what his mother might discover. Boys generally get very horny at around the age of 15. This is the point in many boys' life when even sitting on a vibrating bus can cause a stir in his loins. Before this age, both boys and girls might get some kind of sexual interest in someone, but it can be vague. Still, one study showed that 25% of boys and girls as young as 11 or 12 reported that they think about sex. But when they hit their teens, something changes. It's in the early teens that many boys will start having sexual fantasies. What was previously a nascent and vague feeling about sex becomes something very much real. Only 10% of boys start masturbating at the age of 10, but by the time they're 11 or 12, it's around half of all boys that partake in the old five-knuckle shuffle. The vast majority of boys will slap the salami once they get to 13 and 14, while hardly any girls at all will masturbate before they are 13. From 13 to 14, only about 20% of girls will masturbate. These are rough figures we found in the book Puberty and Adolescent Sexuality. But we have to remember there are many factors as to when the sex drive develops and as to when it's acted upon, such as our culture. Scientists tell us that when guys are around that sometimes difficult age of 15, they're in the most hyper stage of horniness. This is due to their raging testosterone levels. With females, it's very different. Their sex drive really comes into full swing sometime in their 30s. Just as a man's libido might be in its first stage of waning, a woman's can really get going. This, of course, can sometimes cause problems in a relationship. It's akin to discovering Chocolate Mountain when your teeth have fallen out and your appetite isn't what it used to be. In short, men are fast starters, but women catch up. But that doesn't mean both men and women can't be involved in a sexual relationship right up until their 70s or even 80s. One study we found said 40% of adults aged 65 to 80 are sexually active, and more than half, 54%, say sex is important to their quality of life. That's not the kind of study children and grandchildren like reading when thinking about their parents and grandparents, but don't think for a minute, kids, that the older folks can't wear out the bed springs. According to a paper written by researchers at Manchester University's School of Social Sciences, there are some sexual survivors who just don't retire their sex organs. These are the folks that are still going at it in their 80s, and they are loving it. Still, these folks are in the minority. The paper said by the time we reach 85, only 1 in 10 women are still interested in sex, but for men it was a quarter of them. For men, though, their drive isn't always represented by a phallus that can stand straight up when it's needed to go to battle. Luckily for them, there are drugs these days that can help that little fella spring back to life. But as we said, there are more than biological concerns when it comes to sex drive. Plenty of women have hit stagnancy in the sexual realm in their middle ages and found in later life, when they met the right guy, their sex drive suddenly flourished again. And the same goes for men. There are social elements too, such as people thinking they're past it. Old folks might be stuck in a home for the elderly, which is not exactly a sexy environment, but some older people might use their retirement to travel the world where they find their sexuality explodes again. But what about in general? Do either men or women have a higher sex drive? You already know that young males have a stronger sex drive than young females, but in the case of the married couple in the intro, they were both grown up. It seems in that circumstance the woman had the stronger sex drive, but if science is correct, this is an anomaly. It's also likely the man just didn't find the woman sexually attractive anymore. He blamed his age, but was he secretly fantasizing about a younger woman? A man in his 50s wouldn't usually just lose his sex drive. In fact, males aged from their late teens to their 60s will think about sex on average once a day, although it's not easy to measure this, as you can understand. Still, men said they'll fantasize about sex a lot more when they're still young, but they'll keep fantasizing until they hit their winter years. Yep, your grandfather will more than likely still look at young women and imagine getting it on with them. A social psychologist at Florida State University named Roy Baumeister had made a name for himself studying the sex drive, as well as writing myriad well-known books on the matter such as Addiction. He researched the sex drive for a long time, and after interviewing scores of people, he discovered that men get sexually turned on in a spontaneous sense much more than women. He said men want sex more often than women at the start of the relationship, in the middle of it, and after many years of it. This goes for heterosexual men and homosexual men. He also found that men want a higher number of sexual relationships in their lives, and they're more down than women on average in having casual sex. Women focus more on having meaningful relationships, while men are generally more okay with having one-night stands and things like that. We know this sounds like an old-fashioned stereotype, but this is what researchers have found out. It seems men are just more simple in regard to sex. They look at women and some chemical reactions go off in their heads, and they wouldn't mind jumping into bed with this woman. Women, on the other hand, will be aroused often only when other environmental factors are involved. As another researcher put it, sexual desire in women is extremely sensitive to environment and context. This social scientist wrote the book, The Social Organization of Sexuality, Sexual Practices in the United States. In a purely evolutionary sense, a male might want to spread his seed to as many women as possible if they look like they could provide him some offspring and proliferate his genes. But with women, it doesn't make evolutionary sense to sleep with any old man. They'll be looking for a suitable mate. As for masturbation, around 2/3 of adult men, married or not, will carry on beating the beaver. More so, of course, if they're not in a healthy sexual relationship. Still, they'll usually knock the odd one out on the sly even if they are with someone. On the other hand, only about 40% of adult women report masturbating, and if they do it less often than men. Men also seek out more sex when it comes at a cost. The vast majority of prostitution is men seeking women or other men, rather than women seeking another woman or a man. Even priests who've taken a vow of celibacy seek sex more than nuns seek sex. So, what's going on inside men and women? It's hard to say, but one researcher at Northwestern University tried to figure it out by conducting a sex study. She showed the participants a series of erotic movies while a device was attached to their genital areas to measure how turned on they were. The participants were asked how aroused they felt. The straight guys in the study told the researchers that what moved them the most was watching male-to-female sex, but also female-to-female. Those devices told the researchers this was very true. As for homosexual men, they were aroused by seeing male-to-male sex. The women in the study said they were the most aroused by watching male-to-female sex. Maybe they weren't telling the truth though, because the devices showed they were just as aroused watching men having sex with men and women having sex with women. One of the researchers concluded men are very rigid and specific about who they become aroused by, who they want to have sex with, and who they fall in love with. He said women are more open in general to having same-sex relationships, and while they might not do it, they have more of a capacity to do it. That's why more women report being bisexual than men. In terms of making out with people willy-nilly, women who were interviewed showed that many things influenced who they'd have sex with. If the person went to church mattered, but it didn't with men. With women, their friends had an effect on who they'd sleep with, but not so much with men. The study even said that education counted for something with women. The more educated a woman was, the more up for experimenting she was, such as giving and receiving oral sex. Education didn't seem to make a difference when it came to men. In all, the researchers said that men certainly seem to have a higher sex drive and they are less vulnerable to outside factors when it comes to having sex. But is this just plain old-fashioned thinking? It wasn't too long ago that women were expected to hide their sexual feelings and impulses. That might still be true in some cultures, but it seems that men do want more sex with more women, and it doesn't have to involve a lot of preceding chasing. Another researcher said women like a story, they're more complex. An example is that a lot of those online apps that tell a sexual story are dedicated to women. Women like a plot, men are okay with a paragraph. One researcher explained it like this: women want to talk first, connect first, then have sex. For men, sex is the connection. Sex is the language men use to express their tender, loving, vulnerable side. It's their language of intimacy. Maybe some of you have started falling in love and said to yourself, if she liked me, she'd sleep with me. Maybe the woman thinks if he really liked me, he'd wait and let this story flower into something more than a bedboard banging against the wall. Even a woman's orgasm is more complex. With guys, they're usually done within 4 minutes. That's when they're grown up. When that guy who has the stiff socks has sex for the first time, he's more likely to last 4 seconds. But the average woman, young or old, would take on average 11 minutes to reach orgasm if she reaches it at all. In couples, men reported having an orgasm during sex 75% of the time, but with women it was more like 25%. The funny thing is, the men in the study said their partners reached orgasm 45% of the time. As for that couple in their 50s we talked about at the start, other studies have shown that it's actually women who generally lose interest in sex first. Sure, the guy could have had some kind of erectile dysfunction, which can happen to men as they age, but it's possible his member would have worked in different circumstances. Citing another study, the BBC reported that women were twice as likely to lose their sex drive when in a relationship. But this wasn't always about biology. It was often the result of a lack of emotional closeness. The study was undertaken by the British Medical Journal and involved 5,000 men and 6,700 women. Of those people, 15% of the men said they've lost all interest in sex for a period of 3 months or more in the last year. But for women, it was 34%. Nonetheless, with men, the sex drive started faltering between the ages of 35 and 44, and with women, it was between the ages of 55 and 64. Again, though, just because the sexual flame had died didn't mean the sex drive is gone for good. Various circumstances such as hard work or kids or even boredom play a part, but the drive would still be there if things were different. And if you think about what we'd already said, if men's sex drives are not as complex and they're more willing to jump into bed with more people, they will likely be having more sex at an older age than women. It's likely that as time goes on, men will feel more of a need to spread their seed than women will want to have sex for sex sake. You've just finished having sex and it felt great. Now you want to do it all over again, but there's a problem. Your body won't let you. You try as hard as you can to get things going, but nothing happens. You're in the refractory period after sex, and although your partner might be ready to go, there is nothing you can do but wait. What is the refractory period and why does it happen? After an orgasm, both men and women experience what is known as the resolution stage of sex. The body starts to come out from the high from the carnal act, and things like pulse rate and hormone levels begin to return to normal. This is all necessary so you don't die from a heart attack or overexhaustion. Your body can't maintain the heightened physical levels during sex for long periods of time without negative side effects. Both sexes go through a refractory period, but women tend to come out of it much quicker than men. In fact, some women only need a few seconds of recovery time before they're ready to go again. Men, on the other hand, need much longer, which can be a bummer if your partner's ready for round 2. But how long do males have to wait before they can have sex again? That all depends. Could be minutes, hours, or even days. Let's look at what causes the refractory period, and then we'll go into how you can shorten that time between sex sessions. Scientists don't fully understand what causes the refractory period or why it varies so much between men and women, but they do have some ideas. One leading theory is that there is a connection between the hormone prolactin and the time it takes to recover from having sex. In 2002, a 25-year-old man who did not experience a refractory period at all was studied. It was found that he did not secrete the hormone prolactin after climaxing as most men do. This may suggest that prolactin is responsible for turning the body's sexual drive off for a certain period of time following ejaculation, leading to the refractory period. However, due to the small sample size of the test, we still need to conduct much more research around the function of prolactin and its effect on the refractory period. This is especially true because women also secrete prolactin after having an orgasm and then are ready to go again only a few seconds later. There have been cases where men have had dry orgasms without experiencing a refractory period. This is when the male climaxes without ejaculating at all. The dopamine and pleasure hormones are still dumped into the body as if ejaculation had occurred, but no semen leaves the body. This may indicate that the release of semen at the conclusion of sex might play a role in signaling the body to go into the refractory period and not the orgasm itself. A final cause that could be behind the long length of the male refractory period may have to do with the peripheral nervous system. This is the part of the nervous system that does not include the brain and spinal cord. Researchers have found that the peripheral nervous system tends to be much more active following sex than normal. It's been suggested that compounds called prostaglandins are released after sex that affect a male's nerve responses. This in turn creates the refractory period, and in males the prostaglandins may last longer than in females, which could account for longer recovery time. Another compound called somatostatin is also released right after ejaculation and may affect the peripheral nervous system. The combination of somatostatin and prostaglandin and how they affect the nervous system of males could be the reason for the extended refractory periods when compared to females. Or maybe it's just something as simple as women are better at sex than men. At this point in time, we just need more research and data to definitively conclude why the refractory period occurs and its underlying causes. But it's almost certainly a combination of hormones and interactions within the physiology of the body that's causing the phenomenon. Even if we don't know the precise biological reason why refractory periods are so much longer in men than in women, we can identify some factors that affect this mysterious process, and some of them are pretty crazy. As would be expected, the more attracted you are to your sexual partner, the shorter your refractory period lasts. It'll probably not be a lot shorter, but a heightened libido and arousal level has been connected to shorter refractory times. Also, the healthier someone is, the more quickly they'll recover from a sex session and be able to go again. These seem like obvious factors that would affect the refractory period, but what is coming next may shock you. The type of sexual experience plays a role in how long the refractory period lasts as well. For example, someone who is pleasuring themselves will on average have a shorter refractory period than if two people are copulating. In fact, people who achieve ejaculation by masturbation tend to have a much shorter refractory period than while having sex. Men who masturbate sometimes have a refractory period lasting only a few seconds. This brings us back to one of the reasons why the refractory period even occurs. We mentioned the hormone prolactin might play a role in causing the longer refractory period in males. Researchers found that the prolactin levels were 400% higher after ejaculation from sex than ejaculation from masturbation. So there seems to be some kind of connection between having sex with a partner and a lengthened refractory period. The refractory period in men does vary from person to person. It might take a few minutes, a few hours, or even a few days to recover and be ready to go again. Since everyone's body is different, it kinda just depends on who you are. But there are some factors that lengthen the time of the refractory period. The most consistent are age and health. Younger men tend to only need a few minutes of recovery. They may not be able to ejaculate right away, but after a 5 or 10-minute break, they might be able to get an erection again. Although other problems may arise, which we'll talk about later. Older men, on the other hand, will have a longer refractory period, which could last between 12 and 24 hours. It's even been reported that men in the later stages of life can need days to recover and reset their body before the next round of sex can begin. If you're having sex at this age, bravo to you, but also refractory periods probably aren't your biggest concern, as much as staying healthy and keeping the heart strong enough to make it through each sexual encounter. You may be wondering if the refractory period can be shortened, and if not, your partner may be. Our understanding of the refractory period of the human body is tenuous at best. This means we're not entirely sure how to shorten it, but there are some methods that may work. Let's start off by saying there have been no drugs specifically approved for shortening the refractory period in males. However, it's generally reported that men who have higher testosterone levels have shorter refractory periods. This is one of the reasons why older gentlemen tend to need longer recovery times than men at earlier stages of life. Like erectile dysfunction, a refractory period may be helped by the same little blue pill. Some men claimed using drugs like Viagra has helped shorten the refractory period, so they can have more sex more frequently. However, in studies conducted around erectile dysfunction medication and its effects on the refractory period, researchers concluded there is no evidence that the pill shortens the refractory period. So men who claim otherwise may just be experiencing a placebo effect. Overall, medical professionals agree that better health normally leads to better sexual stamina. This means that taking care of your body and exercising frequently may shorten your refractory period. The more healthy you are, the quicker your body can recover, the faster you can get back to having sex, or at least that's the theory. Some people claim that doing pelvic floor muscle training, such as Kegels, may also reduce refractory period length. There's no scientific proof for this, but it has been suggested that the stronger those pelvic muscles are, the better your sexual function will be, so it couldn't hurt to try. However, there may be more fun ways to reduce the length of the refractory period. Switching up how often you have sex could help reduce recovery times. You could try having sex less frequently to see if that makes a difference, or you could have more sex and see how that affects your body. For a good time, the second option is probably the way to go. It's also been suggested that you and your partner could try different positions to mix things up. This can cause different feelings and sensations, which may entice the body to respond differently during and after sex. Really, the only way to reduce the refractory time at this point is through trial and error. You should stay healthy and physically active, but also experiment with timing and sex positions to see if you can reduce the time your body needs to recover between sex sessions. Now we just want to clarify some things. Women do have refractory periods, they just don't seem to be nearly as long as men's. But there are definitely some effects on the female body during the refractory period that males don't experience. For example, during the female refractory period, the clitoris can become too sensitive to continue having sex. Females sometimes need to wait for the body to reset before engaging in sex again. Also, there's the psychological side of the refractory period that occurs in both males and females. Physically, females recover from sex much more quickly than males. However, both males and females can experience a psychological refractory period where they just don't want to have sex again. This is most commonly felt through the sensations of being tired or satisfied. The female genitalia will often stay lubricated even after achieving orgasm. This allows them to continue having sex after they reach completion or even if they're no longer aroused. However, just because their body can have sex doesn't necessarily mean they want to. The refractory period is much longer in men than in women. This most likely has to do with something in body chemistry and physiology. However, both males and females do experience a refractory period, so next time you're ready to go and your partner needs a moment, be patient. They might need a little longer to recover, but you can take that as a compliment. Before there were condoms slid onto bananas and videos warning of the consequences of sex, there was abstinence only. But what was sex education like long ago when medieval kings ruled the land? Sex education has come a long way since the Middle Ages, but not quite as far as you might think. To be fair, sex education got its start way before the Middle Ages. Most attribute the Kama Sutra as being the first book to really discuss sex in any great detail. Therefore, we can look at this book and its teachings as the first form of sex education. The Kama Sutra was written sometime between 400 BCE and 200 CE and would be one of the few books in existence about sex until relatively recently. As Europe entered medieval times, religion dictated many societal norms. This meant that the main form of sex education came from the church. Church court records and documents from the Middle Ages can give us a glimpse into what sex education was like during this time. At the most basic level, the main recommendation for sex from the church was don't do it. Sex was supposed to occur for a single purpose, and that purpose was to make babies. However, people during the Middle Ages, like the rest of history, were promiscuous and didn't exactly follow sex ed teachings of the church. Interestingly, religious leaders began to roll out a sex education campaign in Paris, France, when they realized how much sex was happening not in the bedroom but in stables. This might surprise you, and it definitely surprised the church. until you think about what was actually going on. Male servants often slept in the stables, so if he had a female admirer who wanted to get busy back at his place, they would be doing it in the stable. Since the church was the moral law in medieval Europe, they were responsible for getting the sex-crazed people of society under control. And one way they did this was through sex education using the Word of God. The Church of the Middle Ages continued to push in their sermons and teachings that sex was sinful unless it was used by a married couple to procreate. In fact, one of the largest sex ed campaigns put on by the church was about how men needed to stay away from lustful women. This was reinforced by sermons reiterating that all sin originated with a woman who got humanity thrown out of the Garden of Eden. This was not just a Christian or medieval tactic, however. Across history and across time, women have been blamed for the lusts of man. They've also been blamed as the main source of STDs and the vector by which they spread. It was almost always the female's fault when adulterous behavior occurred in the Middle Ages and the years that followed. It seems that no matter how much time passed or sex education changed, women were still being blamed for the bad decisions of men when it came to sex. You could probably guess why having religious organizations being in charge of sex education would cause some issues, and this would continue for a couple hundred years since sex education would not be taught in schools until much later. As the 1800s rolled around, slight changes started to be implemented in the way sex education was disseminated amongst the public. Contraceptives became more widely available. There were some very basic forms of contraception in the Middle Ages, but nothing was super effective. Interestingly, even though advances were made in contraceptives in the late 1800s, governments such as the United States banned them as a form of birth control. The sex education messages from the government in the 1800s were very similar to that of the church in the Middle Ages. Don't do it unless you're trying to have a kid. It wouldn't be until the following century in the landmark Supreme Court case Griswold versus Connecticut that married couples could legally use contraception. The idea in the 1800s was that talking about sex, showing sex, doing sex, basically anything sex-related, caused more harm than good. So sex education was put on the back burner. Not only was the government refusing to talk about sex education, but the church was backing this strategy as well. Like the church of the Middle Ages, the church of the 1800s spread this message of abstinence being the only sex education people needed. That being said, the church seemed to be preoccupied with another aspect of pleasure as well. During this time, churches created religious pamphlets and books that served as the main source of sex education in the United States and other parts of the world. One of the main points in these teachings was that people should not masturbate. In fact, the focus of many of the most popular religious sex education texts was on masturbation. Some ministers taught that masturbation could lead to memory loss, extensive exhaustion, and even death. Sex education had a long way to go in the 1800s, but at the turn of the century, things began to pick up speed. It would be during the early 1900s that sex education started to move away from being taught by religious leaders like in the Middle Ages and start to be taught in schools. In 1909, Ella Flegg Young became the first female superintendent ever to oversee a major school district. Young was in charge of schools in the city of Chicago, where she had big plans for the curriculum, especially when it came to sex education. Although the program Young wanted to roll out was disguised as hygiene courses, they were really the precursor to sex ed classes. Young and many of the higher-ups in the city of Chicago were worried about the rapid spreading of STDs and the harlots that walked the streets of the city. It's interesting to note that females were once again blamed for the spread of STDs, along with making men do lustful things. So in that particular aspect of sex education, things still hadn't come very far. When Young proposed her sex hygiene curriculum to the public, there was immediate pushback. She pitched it as a course that would help students stay both pure in mind and body. Rather than talking about sex in the schools, the board wanted to just ignore the problem. It didn't help that when local Catholic leaders received word of what Young was trying to do, they put enormous pressure on the government to stop this early form of sex education. Many asked for Young to be removed from her position. Inevitably, the outcry against sex ed won out, and a few years after becoming superintendent, Young was forced to resign. The world was not yet ready to have its youth educated about safe sex practices and how the reproductive system worked. Actually, the United States seemed to be taking steps in the wrong direction around this time. You won't believe the sex education campaign that was rolled out next. In 1914, the first ever movie that can be considered a sex education film was released. Unfortunately, it was full of misinformation. The movie was called Damaged Goods, which probably gives you an idea of where this is going. The basic premise of the movie was that a man slept with a lustful woman on the night before his wedding. The harlot ended up giving the man syphilis, which was eventually passed on to his wife and the baby she carried. Spoiler alert, the main character was so ashamed of what he did, he took his own life. Although the movie was not meant specifically for sex education, it does show the thoughts around sex during this time. The only concrete messages people received so far since the Middle Ages was, sex is sinful, women are harlots, and STDs will be the death of you. Basically, people in power still viewed the best form of sex education to be abstinence, and this still wouldn't change for many years. In fact, the next source of sex education material would come from war. As World War II raged in Europe and the United States decided it was time to get involved, the government released pamphlets and posters warning soldiers about the dangers of loose women and prostitutes. The government actually took things a step further and decided that every woman could be a source of STDs. And since soldiers weren't receiving any kind of sex education in school, this may have been their first introduction to engaging with the opposite sex. This campaign had a clear objective. The government needed to keep their soldiers healthy, and if they caught an STD that made them sick, they couldn't fight the Nazi threat. This meant that men needed to be educated about the consequences of sexual promiscuity, and that was why posters were made as a form of sex education around STDs. To be fair, the posters weren't so much educational as just another way to try to convince people to remain abstinent, but like always, never worked. Between the world wars, the government did try to introduce some form of sex education into schools. In the 1920s, the U.S. Public Health Service created a manual that had suggested topics about sex that might be discussed in the classroom. But like many times before, there was pushback. People still didn't want their children to learn or talk about sex. Therefore, sex education was to be kept out of schools at all costs. As the 20th century progressed, schools, religious groups, and anyone else talking about sex education doubled down on abstinence. The 1960s was a sexual awakening for many, but not for sex education. Mainstream information around sex gave two options: either you get married or you don't have sex. But progress was slowly starting to be made during this time. Although sex education curriculums tended to remain the same, more and more organizations argued that the way sex was being talked about needed to change. Advocates for better sex education argued that teaching about sex shouldn't just be about abstinence and shaming people, mostly women, who wanted to engage in the activity. Instead, the education around the carnal act should be more comprehensive and safe sex practices should be discussed. It was also during the 60s that contraceptives became legal, so sex was no longer seen as an act of procreation alone. As you can probably guess, this led to major backlash from many people and organizations. There was actually protests outside of government buildings and schools to try to stop the teaching of sex education. Then, in the 1980s, people were forced to confront the lack of sex education as the AIDS epidemic swept across the world. Public health organizations all advocated for safe sex being taught in schools and to inform students of the dangers of HIV and other STIs. There was still pushback from many conservatives, including George Bush Sr. and later his son, who both ran on a platform to fund sex education programs that only taught abstinence. But the right changes to sex education finally began to occur at the end of the 20th century. By 2015, sex education took the form of what we have today. Public schools began to include not just topics about sex and STDs in their curriculums, but also unwanted sexual advances and positive communication. To be fair, even today, sex education classes are not always great at delivering the information students need to practice safe sex. Oftentimes in the United States, health classes are taught by teachers who are forced into doing it and not trained on the subject. These courses rarely meet every day. Sex education is something that is required but isn't always taken seriously by the school. The reality is most young people today get their sex education from movies or the shows they watch. Many places have come a long way from abstinence-only teachings, but not all. There are still public schools that implement this type of curriculum, and in religious institutions around the world, this form of sex education can be much more common. So, even though we know a lot more about sex, pregnancy, and how infectious diseases work, unless the information is taught to every student and adult, we still have a long way to go in the world of sex education. The amount of sex some species have boggles the mind. How much sex is too much sex? What animal can mate for 14 hours straight? Which marine creature uses the largest penis in the world to copulate? Let's find out. We're going to start with dolphins, because like humans, we know they have sex just for fun sometimes. Animals who engage in sex for reasons besides reproduction tend to have a lot of it, because sex feels good. Dolphins are a prime example of this. They will copulate even if the female cannot get pregnant at the time. What makes the amount of sex dolphins have even more surprising is not just that they do it a lot, but how many times it can occur within a short period. When a male wants to mate, he begins posturing in front of a potential partner. If successful, the dolphins will line up stomach to stomach and intercourse will begin. Dolphin sex is rather quick though, as the act is normally over in under a minute. But here's where things get crazy. Dolphins conduct many rounds of intercourse in a very short amount of time. Researchers have recorded 2 dolphins having sex 15 times in 15 minutes. That number alone is more sex than most animals will have in a year, or even in their lifetime. And remember, dolphins don't just engage in sex for reproductive purposes, but each one of their short bouts can be a pleasurable experience as well. The next animal you've probably never heard of, but unlike dolphins, the sex between these animals can last a long time. We're talking a really, really long time. The brown antechinus are marsupial mice that live in Australia. For the amount of time they live, they have a ton of sex. Females mate with as many partners as possible, allowing for multiple sexual encounters in a short period of time. However, there's only so much time in a day, and since the brown antechinus sex lasts around 14 hours, this is a limiting factor. Males begin mating once a year and go at it for a whole month. During this time, all the male does is have sex, and remember, each time he engages in the act, it can last for up to 14 hours. The male brown antechinus are so focused on sex that they barely eat, sleep, or do anything else for a whole month. Once 2 brown antechinus are done mating, they'll rest for a brief period of time and then go in search of their next partner. However, all this long sex takes its toll on the body, and the male brown antechinus literally dies from exhaustion after the sex-filled month. This means that at the beginning of the month, the male is a virgin, and at the end of the month, he is dead from having 14-hour sex dozens of times. You might have to wonder, is this such a bad way to go? The brown antechinus is a small mouse, but our next species is large, aggressive, and horny. Actually, it would be more apt to say tusky, as the next animal on our list of most sexually active species is the walrus. Male walrus can weigh up to 3,700 pounds. When they're ready to mate, which is frequently, they'll make loud vocal sounds that click, pulse, and whistle. The largest and most powerful male walruses have a harem of females that they have sex with. This actually happens underwater, probably because it'd be too dangerous for the massive animals to have sex on land, due to the danger of someone being crushed. Female walruses tend to mate only once every 2 to 3 years, which means if the male wants to mate more frequently, it needs a large harem of females. That being said, the male walrus has the largest penis of any animal in the world. When erect, the walrus penis can reach up to 30 inches, which is used to impregnate as many females as possible during mating season. So when it comes to walruses, it's the male of the species who are doing most of the copulating. Our next species is often considered to be the king and queens of the savannah. However, what makes lions especially unique is their mating habits. A pride of lions can be made up of as many as 30 individuals. However, not all of them are able or allowed to mate. When a lioness goes into heat, she is only fertile for around 4 days. And you know what that means. If she wants to get pregnant, she needs to have a lot of sex. Since 4 days isn't a very long time, this means that lions mate several times an hour when the female's in heat. This is one of the highest frequencies of any species. Having sex multiple times an hour can be exhausting, but the lions keep at it as the window for reproductive success is short. The interesting thing is that after the 4-hour days of non-stop sex, the lioness may still not be pregnant. In this case, the lioness goes back into heat about 2 weeks later, and the sex starts all over again. This means that every 2 weeks the lions are going at it like rabbits until the female gets pregnant. And speaking of rabbits, these animals have become synonymous with having massive amounts of sex. Unlike most animals, rabbits are fertile all year round and can have multiple litters a year. They also don't need to be in heat to reproduce, as the act of sexual intercourse is what causes a female rabbit to ovulate. A female rabbit allows male rabbits to have sex with her about 14 out of every 16 days. This means for every 2 days of rest, the female rabbit may have had 2 weeks worth of sex. Male rabbits, on the other hand, are good to go whenever. So if the female will allow it, the male rabbits will have sex every day. The short-beaked echidna is another animal that has a lot of sex. But it's the ritual that leads up to the way they have sex that makes each round particularly unique. The females of the species of echidna are actually the ones having the most sex. This is because she will have a line of about 9 males following her around for an entire month, waiting for her to be ready to mate. There's no sex during this time, but once the female is ready, the echidnas go crazy. This next part is especially weird, so prepare yourself. The female short-beaked echidnas have a forked reproductive tract. This would make sex with a single penis very difficult. But luckily for the males of the species, they have a penis with 4 heads. And it gets crazier. After one of the heads ejaculates semen into the female, the male will insert a different penis head that still contains sperm and go again. This means that each time the echidnas mate, they're actually having sex 4 times. And if you do the math, this means that for each time the female has sex with one of the 9 males that followed her around for a month, she will have sex with 36 different penis heads. Our next species wants to have a lot of sex, but since during mating season males outnumber females around 8 to 1, only a very few get lucky. The Australian giant cuttlefish meet in the same location known as Pointy Lowly every winter to engage in a massive orgy. The amount of copulating that occurs during this time in the large gathering of sex-crazed cuttlefish is astounding. The problem is that the males outnumber the females by a lot. This means that sex between cuttlefish can be challenging if you're not the biggest and brightest in the orgy. But even the smaller cuttlefish want to have sex, so they'll actually change their coloring to disguise themselves as females and enter the orgy incognito. By doing this, they may eventually run into an actual female and get the chance to reproduce. And with so many males swarming around the cuttlefish orgy, it's inevitable that a female will have sex numerous times during that one session. This provides the opportunity to have a lot more sex than any animal in a monogamous relationship during the course of their life. It probably comes as no surprise that primates have a lot of sex. Humans are primates, and we definitely have more sex than most animals because we do it for pleasure as well as reproduction. But our distant cousin the bonobo puts our species to shame. Bonobos are a species of apes that live in the Congo. What makes them particularly unique is they have the most sex out of any other primate species. And bonobos aren't picky with who they have sex. They will engage in intercourse with the opposite sex as well as the same sex. They obviously have sex for more reasons than just reproduction, and although some of the unions may be for pleasure, many scientists believe that bonobos have frequent sex to strengthen bonds within their societies. The copious amounts of copulation happening within a group of bonobos could be to show hierarchy and dominance in the group, relieve tension and conflicts, or just to solidify bonds with one another. But the amount of sex itself is not the only fascinating thing about bonobos. They engage in some sexual activities in some pretty creative ways. Researchers have recorded bonobos having sex while swinging and in other acrobatic positions. Sex for bonobos seems to be as creative as it is fun or meaningful. This is so true that a National Geographic biologist named Franz de Waal even said, whereas the chimpanzee shows little variation in the sexual act, bonobos behave as if they've read the Kama Sutra, performing every position and variation one can imagine. It is also interesting to note that there is much less conflict in bonobo societies than in other primate species, and this includes humans. So perhaps we could learn something from the bonobos and practice more love instead of war, or at least more sex instead of fighting so much with one another. And this brings us to humans. Where do we stand in the amount of sex our species has compared to others? You may be surprised to learn that humans actually do engage in more sex than most species. Not compared to bonobos, but compared to most other animals, we engage in carnal activity more frequently. This is because we really enjoy having sex. It feels good, and we live in a society where sex sells and therefore is encouraged. It's unclear whether other species experience orgasms the same way humans do, but for species like dolphins and bonobos that have sex just for fun, it would seem there is some pleasure attached to it. A 2017 study found that humans are estimated to have sex around 54 times a year when sexually active. This is just over once a week. And although other species may have the same or more sex than us, we are unique in that humans don't mind spreading out our copulations throughout the year. We also don't normally have so much sex that it kills us, which allows us to have more sex over the course of our lives than some other species. Talking about you, brown echinus. They say the best way to a man's heart is through his stomach. But that's a common misconception. In reality, the best way to his heart is actually through the fifth intercostal space, out of the left mid-clavicular line. And there's a lot more that most people don't understand about men. A lot of questions that tend to go unanswered. Like, why do guys get random erections? Why does cold cause, shrinkage? What causes male pattern baldness? Thankfully, these mysteries don't have to remain unsolved. Today, we're diving into some of the weirdest facts about men. To kick things off, let's talk about erections. 50% of the population has them, and humanity wouldn't be able to multiply without them. So let's remove that stigma and open up the conversation. Millions of men all around the world have dealt with the stress and embarrassment of random, unanticipated erections. So what causes them? Ghosts? A trickster god? The cursed coin you stole from that old lady? Nope, nothing like that. It's completely normal and natural. Erections are normally caused by sexual arousal, which in turn increases blood flow to the penis, allowing it to rise to the occasion, so to speak. But sometimes erections occur without the presence of sexual arousal. One potential cause is hormone fluctuations, specifically the fluctuation of testosterone levels. Testosterone levels naturally fluctuate throughout the day and can be influenced by stress, diet, exercise, sleep, and aging. As these testosterone levels shift, they can sometimes trigger unexpected or unwanted erections. There are also medications that can cause random erections as a side effect, including antidepressants, blood pressure medications, and some antihistamines. Yes, treating your allergies can result in random erections. If this happens, it's important to discuss it with your doctor and find a way to adjust your treatment. One of the most common types of random erections occurs first thing in the morning. Nocturnal penile tumescence, or morning wood, as it's been nicknamed, is caused when the penis fills with blood and you wake up with an erection. These can sometimes be brought on by dreams of the more erotic variety, but more often than not, they're caused by something more physiological. The parasympathetic nervous system is the part of the nervous system responsible for digestion, urination, and sexual arousal. When this system is active, it can cause an erection. This part of your brain becomes really active when you sleep, especially during the REM or rapid eye movement stage. This is also the sleep stage at which dreams occur. Most people wake up after or during REM sleep, meaning the odds of waking up with an erection are relatively high. These dreams don't have to be sexual, they can be about anything. Even that dream where you're falling off a cliff, or running from one of those giant inflatable guys they put outside of used car lots. Now, is that just me? Nocturnal penile tumescence can also be triggered by sleeping with a full bladder. Some experts theorize that a full bladder puts pressure on the sacral nerve, triggering a parasympathetic nervous system response and resulting in an erection. Whatever the cause, morning wood is completely normal and can last anywhere from a few minutes to 35 minutes. Sometimes the same factors that lead to nocturnal penile tumescence can cause nocturnal emissions or wet dreams. In these cases, ejaculation occurs while the person is still sleeping. This can be the result of a sex dream, but can also just be set off by stressful dreams in REM sleep, activating our good old friend, the sympathetic nervous system again, causing the involuntary reaction. Sometimes the problem isn't poorly timed erections, but a lack of erections when you really need one, but we'll get to that one a bit later. First, let's move away from the penis for a moment and talk about the breasts. Male breasts specifically. Did you know that men can produce breast milk? This might sound like a fake fact that we made up, but it's true. Any man can lactate under the right conditions. Jack Newman, a Toronto-based doctor and breastfeeding expert, spoke with Scientific American about the possibilities of male lactation. Any changes in the production of prolactin, the hormone that causes milk production, can lead to spontaneous lactation, even in someone who has not given birth. For example, Thorazine, an antipsychotic used in the mid-20th century, caused the pituitary gland to overproduce prolactin. This could then induce lactation. Lactation is also a potential side effect of digoxin, a heart medication. A tumor in the pituitary gland could also increase prolactin levels and cause the same issue. It's also been pointed out that prolactin can be released in the body simply through nipple stimulation. Most men's breasts may look different from most women's, but under the right conditions, both are capable of producing milk. On the topic of facts that sound like we made them up, did you know it might be possible for someone to smell if you're single? A study at Australia's Macquarie University found that heterosexual women assessing the body odor of random men consistently rated single men as having stronger body odor than those in relationships. Though the exact cause of this could not be determined, there were some theories. Mainly, it's been found that single men have higher testosterone levels on average than men in relationships, and testosterone levels are correlated with stronger body odor. Of course, this might just be due to the fact that older men are more likely to have partners, and testosterone levels decrease with age. There will need to be more research on the matter to determine for sure if someone can actually smell your singlehood on you. Now for some slightly less fun but still important facts. On average, men have a shorter life expectancy than women, and one of the factors that contributes to that is a higher risk of heart disease. The leading cause of death for men is heart disease, and men are statistically diagnosed with heart disease when they're 10 years younger compared to their female counterparts. So men, please look after your hearts, and not just romantically. Okay, now we can get back to talking about penises. Approximately 30 million men in the United States are affected by erectile dysfunction. Erectile dysfunction, also called ED or impotence, is a condition wherein a man has difficulty getting or maintaining an erection. ED can be caused by physical or mental factors, and the physical side of this is thought to be broken down into three major causes. The first is a lack of blood flow to the penis, caused by issues such as heart disease, smoking, or high blood sugar levels. The second is difficulty storing blood in the penis during an erection, also known as venous leak or cavernosal dysfunction. The third cause is the inability for the nerve signals from the brain to reach the penis, which can be caused by injuries, surgeries in the area, or illness. Psychological factors such as stress and anxiety can also contribute to ED. Luckily, it can be treated in a variety of ways, from lifestyle changes to medications. But we didn't always understand what caused ED or how to best treat it. In their desperation to cure erectile dysfunction, men throughout history have resorted to some pretty bizarre remedies in an attempt to reinvigorate their sex lives. Ancient Egyptians would rub a mix of baby crocodile hearts and wood oil onto a chronically flaccid penis. The Romans went for the oral approach. No, not like that, get your mind out of the gutter. They would consume the genitalia of animals known for high sex drives, such as rabbits. 13th century German friar Albertus Magnus also swore by this cure, advising men struggling with impotence to roast a wolf penis in an oven, then chew on a small portion of it. No advice on how to get a wolf penis without getting mauled to death, though. Albertus also suggested eating starfish to aid with the issue, though that could lead to the patient ejaculating blood. Maybe some treatments are just not worth trying. The practice of eating animal parts to cure erectile dysfunction persists to this day, with black markets providing illegally acquired tiger penis to alleviate ED symptoms, a cure from ancient Chinese medicine. Needless to say, it does not actually work, and it means that the struggle to get sufficient erections has actually indirectly contributed to the tiger's status as an endangered species. If you thought starfish came with nasty side effects, wait until you hear about the miracle cure of the late 1890s. Radium suppositories. Yes, radium as in the radioactive substance, and yes, suppositories as they went exactly where you'd expect. Or if that was a bit too much, there was also the option to insert radioactive wax rods into your urethra. For another horrible cure, but one that wasn't nearly as likely to cause cancer, there were testicle transplants like the one performed by Dr. Sergei Voronov in 1913. He transplanted pieces of tissue from a baboon's testicles into a 74-year-old man. An American Dr. John Brinkley took that idea and, up until 1939, was castrating goats and sewing their testicles into his patients' scrotums to also solve ED issues. Another inadvisable natural cure for erectile dysfunction is the bite of the Brazilian wandering spider. The erection caused by that bite is much more pain than pleasure, however, as it induces an agonizing 4-hour erection followed by death. Speaking of 4-hour erections, have you ever heard that number thrown around? Maybe as a disclaimer in the ads for erectile dysfunction medications like Viagra? There's a reason for that. Prolonged, unwanted erections, such as the kind that can be caused by an adverse reaction to Viagra or the bite of the Brazilian wandering spider, are called priapism. Some types of priapism are not cause for concern, but ischemic priapism, which results from blood being unable to exit the penis, can cause permanent damage to the penis if not properly treated. This is usually accomplished via a small needle and a syringe, which removes the excess blood from the area. But let's not dwell on that mental image for too long. Just as the penis can become too engorged, it can also shrink down in a way that causes distress and discomfort. Many guys who've climbed out of a cold swimming pool have experienced shrinkage, a phenomenon that occurs when the penis shrinks in size after exposure to cold temperatures. Director of Sexual Health and Medicine at Weill Cornell Medicine, Darius Paduk, said that exposure to the cold causes the blood vessels to constrict, limiting blood flow to the penis and causing it to decrease in size. It's a frustrating occurrence, but there are actually evolutionary benefits to it. The human body has evolved over time to preserve heat and energy. When it's exposed to extreme cold, it focuses all of its resources on keeping the blood flowing to the vital organs in the middle of the body. In order to do that, blood flow to less necessary appendages has to be reduced. This includes the fingers, the toes, and yes, in spite of how necessary of an appendage you might find it to be, the penis. The testicles also retract toward the rest of the body for a similar reason, so they can stay warm. A study from King's College London revealed that 30% of men are insecure about the size of their penis, and it's certainly a subject that gets a lot of attention. Amidst conversation about size in general, there's a frequent cultural discussion of the difference between a grower and a shower. As the names imply, a penis that is a shower does not change much in size from flaccid to erect, whereas a grower may appear smaller when flaccid, but becomes dramatically larger when erect. But is that actually a thing? In short, yes, but not for everyone. In March of 2023, a study was presented at the European Association of Urology Congress in Milan that determined a scientific definition for both growers and showers. If a person's penis size increased by more than 56% from flaccid to erect, they could be considered a grower, while the penis that increased by less than 36% qualified as a shower. Most male participants in the study did not fall into either category, neither growers nor showers. No correlation could be found between those qualities and age, weight, or smoking status. The study also determined that subjects who qualified as showers tended to have longer, flaccid penises on average than growers. In grower penises, the tunica albuginea, spongy erectile tissue in the penis, became thinner during erection than the shower penises. This is likely due to the presence of more elasticity in these tissues in penises that require it to stretch further and account for the growth. So essentially, growers and showers do exist, but are not neat categories that all men fall into. Another sexual frustration that tends to plague men is the sense of exhaustion and sleepiness that sets in immediately after orgasm. What is it about the orgasm that just hits the snooze button in the male body? Well, prolactin is once again playing a significant role in things, though there's no milk involved this time. Prolactin's released during orgasm, and prolactin just so happens to suppress dopamine, a neurotransmitter that makes you feel more awake. Oxytocin is also released during sex, lowering stress and making it easier to relax and drift off to sleep afterward. Combine that with the fact that people tend to have sex later in the day, which causes the hormone melatonin to release and kickstart the sleep cycle. And you have a cocktail of chemicals signaling it's bedtime and not in a sexual way. If men manage to not fall asleep after sex, they may find themselves frustrated by the refractory period. The refractory period is the scientific term for the time following ejaculation when a man is no longer able to get an erection. This is caused by the dopamine and testosterone levels in the body dropping, as well as, yet again, the rise in prolactin. These factors contribute to relaxation and the inability to achieve an erection immediately following orgasm. The duration of this period varies wildly from person to person. Some men only need half an hour or even less. Others need hours or sometimes the entire day. This can depend on age, arousal levels, hormones, and general physical health. As odd, confusing, and frustrating as the human body can be sometimes, it's important to remember that we are not alone in experiencing all of the bizarre, gross, amazing things that make us human. How do you actually get one? Or keep one? Or for that matter, make one go away quickly? And generally, how big is one supposed to be? Can they hurt you? Or even kill you? We recently came across a highly disturbing headline in British news media that read, "Married man dies from his own erection." Gee whiz, we thought, that's really not good, especially if you're at that stage in life when you can consider yourself a veritable champion of the chubby, a prince of the pocket rocket. But was this killer erection a true story, or was it misinformation, or maybe a little bit of media exaggeration? We'll get to the weird and wacky stuff like that later, but first you need to know some hard facts about the bulging bratwurst. Not all erections are alike. They come in different shapes and sizes, and each has its own peculiar habits. But we all have them for the same reason, which is related to sexual pleasure and procreation. Even so, male fetuses can have erections in the womb. It's also not uncommon for infants and young children. This certainly doesn't mean the kid is having sexual thoughts, it's just an accident of biology, completely normal, although in very, very rare cases, if the boner stays, he might have what's called a prolonged penile erection. We'll talk about that later. For now, just know that for any male child, well before he even realizes what an erection actually means, the process is totally natural. It doesn't mean he's a freak or overly sexual or any different from any other kid. Just about all babies and children get the occasional accidental boner. Males can reach puberty anywhere from the age of 9 to 14, although for many males it's somewhere between 10 and 12 that things start to change. Between 15 and 17, his puberty phase will come to completion. Welcome to the early stages of manhood. When a boy's puberty hormones kick in, the testicles usually get bigger, hairs spurt around their genitals and under their arms, and importantly for this show at least, erections become more frequent. These erections also start getting paid for their hard construction work, meaning they start to receive and eject semen. You might not know it, but your semen is impressive stuff. Each package of semen contains all manner of treats. It's a 5 to 25 calorie goodie bag of vitamin C and B12. It contains calcium, citric acid, fat, fructose, lactic acid, magnesium, potassium, sodium, zinc, and all manner of proteins. Within water, mucus, and plasma, all those nutrients act to keep the spermatozoa alive. Spermatozoa are the life-giving property contained inside the semen. With each ejaculation, around 200 to 300 million of them might waste away on some tissue or a sock after 15 to 30 minutes, in the external world, or in the act of making love, they will try to survive the trip inside a woman's reproductive system. In what is literally an adventure of a lifetime, a single sperm might reach a woman's egg as soon as 30 to 45 minutes after takeoff. But it might also take hours. Sperm can actually live inside a woman for up to 5 days and still have the ability to fertilize an egg. If not released into the wild, the sperm can stay alive in a male body for 74 days. After this period of time, the sperm will die and be reabsorbed by his body. Once a boy has been through puberty, he's a sperm-making machine, an absolute warrior of productivity. He'll produce millions and millions of sperm cells every single day, each of them tiny, measuring about 0.002 inches. That's small, but the full semen package can be substantial. It can taste substantial too, coming off as bitter and salty, but it can also be sweet or metallic tasting according to those that have dined on this delicacy. In interviews, one woman said it hardly tastes of anything, if not a bit salty, while Michelle, 24, said, "It's a tolerable taste, but not something you'd choose to snack on if it were an actual food item. But Michelle, just think of all those wholesome nutrients." We're joking. You'd actually have to consume gallons of the stuff to get any dietary health benefits. And the fact that men produce 1.25 to 5 milliliters of semen per time on average, gallons would be hard to come by. Excuse the pun. Okay, so how does your body keep making this endless stream of sperm, which, by the way, will add up to about 7.5 liters for the average male life? The process of making sperm involves something called seminiferous tubules. These are home to germ cells that hormones, such as testosterone, turn into good old sperm. These germ cells grow up to become little tadpole things which are able to travel up another tube called the epididymis. They spend about 5 weeks in this tube and then move on to something called the vas deferens. This is an ongoing process until you die, unless there's something physiologically wrong with you. Still, you produce less sperm in older age. It takes about 2.5 months to turn a germ cell into a sperm cell that's mature enough to make the journey to the egg and create a new human. You can't turn this process off. You have a lifetime supply, even if you masturbate 80 times a day. Apparently, a guy from Argentina won some kind of record and did it 83 times in 24 hours. But even he would have had something left on round 84. Even so, a study from 2016 found that when 3 males held off masturbating for several days and then ejaculated 4 times with 2-hour breaks in between, they produced fewer sperm each time. Another study found that when men were habitual masturbators, while their sperm count dropped, the quality of the sperm wasn't affected at all. Even if you never ejaculate at all, your body will just reabsorb the sperm you produce, and the process keeps turning over. So-called fabstinence won't harm you at all, but it may make you feel horny or expedite a wet dream, aka nocturnal emission. There are people that believe abstinence from masturbation provides them with mental health benefits and higher levels of energy. Maybe they do feel that, but there's no science as yet to prove it. Moving on, young men tend to get hung up about ejaculating too quickly when they finally get it on with the person of their dreams. We've all been there. Well, most men have. This is called premature ejaculation, which can be a problem for some men and their partners. 30% of the male population in the whole world experiences regular premature ejaculation. You're not alone. Finishing too fast or not being able to start, which can produce what's called sexual performance anxiety, will at one point or another be a factor in just about every male's life. Thank God then for the squeeze method. This is when you squeeze your penis to stop yourself from ejaculating. You need to squeeze something called your frenulum, which is the part of the penis where the head meets the shaft. Just a bit of light pressure with your thumb and forefinger can stop you from finishing when you don't want to finish. You could always just let it go. Young men are usually easily capable of 2 to 3 orgasms a night. They also have a short refractory period compared to older men, meaning they don't need to wait so long to start the next round. According to research, the average intravaginal ejaculation latency time, meaning the average time it takes a man to ejaculate once he's entered the vagina of a woman, is 6.5 minutes. But only for guys aged 18 to 30. More recent research said 5.4 minutes is the average time for men of all ages. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, aka the DSM, describes premature ejaculation as a persistent or recurrent pattern of ejaculation occurring during partnered sexual activity with approximately 1 minute following vaginal penetration and before the person wishes it. Back in 1948, Alfred Kinsey's research found that 3/4 of American men ejaculated within the first 2 minutes of penetration. This was for heterosexual men, but we looked at forums where homosexual men talked about it, and a lot of respondents said around 5 minutes, sometimes less, sometimes more. As for what women want, a recent poll showed that the average time women want to be enjoined in coitus was 25 minutes. But the poll didn't specify if foreplay was involved. We imagine it'd be pretty normal for a woman to feel rather upset if the entire routine was over in just a few minutes. Whatever women want, they're not likely going to get the Hollywood montage lovemaking scene every time they go to bed with a guy. It's just not a reality for most people. 5 minutes is a job well done for most of the world. Okay, so what actually makes boners possible in the biological sense? The Roman Greek physician and philosopher Galen, who took medicine and medical research to another level in antiquity, thought long and hard about the stiffy. That's not exactly how the medical books put it, but Galen did spend a fair bit of his time musing about the inflation of the male appendage. The Roman elite would go to him seeking advice on why their John Thomas was no longer standing at attention, hoping Galen could give them some ancient form of Viagra. He told them to anoint it with honey before sex, or put arugula seed in honey and drink it. If that didn't work, he told those desperate men, whenever the bull urinates after sex, mix the soil and the mud made by the urine into a plaster and anoint it on the penis. Galen was smart, but he didn't have a clue about how the male phallus became hard. He believed it was a matter of air being pumped into the penis, but he was well off the mark. Then Leonardo da Vinci came along in the 15th century and blew up the world of science. Was there anything da Vinci couldn't do? He wasn't just a talented painter, he was also an ingenious scientist, including a notable egghead where human anatomy was concerned. He drew a lot of pictures of the penis, and he understood that the penis became hard because of blood, not air. He came to this conclusion after dissecting the cadavers of men that had been hanged. When such an execution occurs, the male member does indeed become erect, and as Da Vinci found out, it was because it was filled with blood. This is because a part of the noose creates pressure on the part of the brain called the cerebellum, and this excites the nerves. The dead men can stay hard because in death, blood pools where gravity wants it to pool. In fact, many types of swift and sudden death can lead to an erection. Men can also ejaculate, pee, or poop when they no longer have control of their body. The 18th century Swiss anatomist and physiologist Albrecht von Haller took things a little further. He said the nervous system rules the penis. The penis does not have a mind of its own, as many men and women have said at some point in their life. But the brain does indeed cause the penis to inflate. Von Haller, the so-called father of physiology, knew that it was the nervous system that was responsible for the bulge in a man's pantaloons, although it seems the Chinese knew that too. At this point in time, a study on the matter tells us ancient Taoists believed that it could be beneficial to a man to preserve his semen since they thought it would return to his brain. Keeping it in your pants, they said, makes you smarter. That's not true, but we imagine many people have said it throughout their lives. When you're sexually aroused either by touch, sight, or thought, the autonomic nervous system kicks into action. This is the part of the nervous system that makes things happen without your conscious input, such as controlling how fast you're breathing or when you need to pee, or indeed when you become erect. You can't control that. As much as a 16-year-old boy would love to make that erection go away in gym class when he sees the person he adores running around, it's not something he has much choice about. He can be aroused by touch, of course, but in this case, thought does the job. His brain creates hormones that send a cascade of blood into a spongy tube-like structure inside the penis known as the corpus cavernosum. And the penis fills up. It's just like filling up a rubber glove with water. Pour just a little bit of water in and you can have a pretty soft and limp glove finger. But pour a lot and it gets really stiff. The more you're aroused, the more blood gets pumped. High testosterone levels, which you have during puberty, make the blood pump harder. It also happens in the morning, known colloquially as morning wood. The technical term is nocturnal penile tumescence. Scientists say this is all about hormonal testosterone changes when you sleep. It might also be the fact that the sacral nerve is pressed when your bladder is full. Teens and young adults get them more than older guys. When you get hard, blood is redirected from another part of your body toward your penis. For those of you with very large penises, a doctor explained in an interview, you almost never find a penis so large that a man would pass out when erect. On average, an erection takes about 130 milliliters of blood. That's just a bit less than your standard glass of red wine in a restaurant. So, If you ever find yourself getting an erection across the dinner table from someone, just imagine all that wine flowing into your penis. Given that the human body carries around 1.2 to 1.5 gallons of blood, you easily have enough to redirect to your penis when nature comes a-calling. This brings us to another matter. As we said, some people, especially younger guys, don't always welcome their erections when they come at the wrong time. You might have heard you can meditate or take a cold shower to get rid of your erection, but let's face it, that wouldn't work in a class or in the backseat of a car. Sure, you can focus on the recently deceased dog that you loved so much, or perhaps imagine talking to your grandmother. That's the psychological way of escaping your embarrassing erection. Tried and tested by boys and men for millennia, but it doesn't always work. A doctor in Britain also said you could try flexing a muscle, especially a big one, such as your thigh muscle, as this would redirect blood away from your corpus cavernosum. You also have a tube on each side of the penis, so it's really the corpora cavernosa. The NHS in Britain said to try jogging to get rid of the erection, which again is useless advice to a guy at a pool party or on a first date. We know what an ill-timed or undesirable boner feels like. Surplus libido can be challenging, so better advice would be to do the squeeze method again. Not try to stop ejaculation, but this time to bring on softness, aka detumescence. A 10 to 20 second squeeze should work. This isn't about interrupting blood flow, but making something called the bulbospongiosus muscle contract. This muscle plays a major role in erections and ejaculation. Some of you will be familiar with the difficulty of achieving an erection while drunk. This is called alcohol-induced erectile dysfunction. The same might happen with medications because these substances are what are called central nervous system depressants. Booze interrupts those messages being sent to your brain from your nerves. When drunk, arousal is harder, despite what you might tell yourself. Also, because alcohol makes you urinate a lot, your total blood volume will be reduced, and as you know, you need that blood to fill your tubes. There's also the fact that alcohol can make you dehydrated. This can lead to a hormone called angiotensin being released, which in turn causes vasoconstriction, a narrowing of your blood vessels. You might be able to get hard, but it might not stay hard if there's vasoconstriction going on. Another thing young men and some older men for that matter get hung up on is penis size. Some guys are obsessed with this, which is actually quite a modern phenomenon. The ancient Greeks and Romans used to think small penises were admirable. They said large pieces of junk were for ogres. These days, men will pay good money to try to make their penis look like something the Greeks and Romans considered backward and vulgar. You'll never see an ancient European statue with a 10-inch schlong, that's for sure. Not unless that statue is supposed to depict something ogre-like. It's only us modern folks that put a lot of emphasis on the size of the penis, but the vast majority of women will tell you it's what you do with it that counts, and of course how they feel about the owner. Research shows just 69% of women have an orgasm when they have sex, compared to 95% of men. Research also shows that women have a higher chance of orgasming with someone they're in a relationship with. Penis size is rarely a factor, since it doesn't really affect clitoris stimulation. The clitoris, a super-sensitive erogenous zone that can bring on an almost instant ecstasy, is the little hooded button of sorts above the vaginal opening and the urethra. You don't need an outsized schlong to stimulate it. In other words, it's no use having a $12,000 Pinarello carbon road bike if you can barely even cycle to the local convenience store without getting tired. Actually, that happens all the time, and some men might think their large phallus is enough for women, but it's not usually. Then again, in a recent study when women had to choose from a penis in a series of 3D penis models, the results showed the ideal penis measured 6.3 inches in length and 4.8 inches around. They might be disappointed in real life, considering the average erect penis size is 5.2 inches long and 4.6 inches around. This data was from a 2015 study which importantly made sure the 15,521 participants couldn't do the measuring themselves. Numerous studies over the years, including a recent one in the Journal of Sex and Marital Therapy, show men all over the world often lie about their penis size, or at least tend to overestimate their penis size. We imagine many of you just did that when we started talking about penis length. Since we are so obsessed with male schlongs, such a penis size study has become controversial. Some of them have said penis size changes depending on the race of the person, but looking at studies from all over the world, It seems the average guys are usually somewhere between 5 and 6 inches, with outliers of course. Some erect penises are more like 3 and a bit inches, a micropenis, and there are men with much longer penises. It was reported not long ago that a guy in Canada was recorded as having an 18.9-inch penis. A fairly recent British TV program on Channel 4 called My Massive showed that men often struggle with their extra-large penises. Some studies have said there are countries where guys have longer penises on average, such as the Republic of Congo. The scientific journal Personality and Individual Differences said the men living there had an average penis size of 7.1 inches. That same study said in general men living in African nations had longer penises while men in Northeast Asia had smaller ones on the average, but that same study said men in Ecuador and Colombia were also quite a bit over the average. Other researchers have said race doesn't mean anything where penis size is concerned. One such study in the U.S. said Asian American men, Black American men, White American men, Pacific Islander Hawaiian men, and Native American men all had pretty similar penis sizes on average, somewhere between 5 and 6 inches when fully erect. We guess researchers will have to disagree on this matter, but something they don't disagree on is that some men are showers and some are growers. If you walked into a male changing room, you'd notice that some men have dongs hanging out like genetically modified bananas. You look around and other guys have penises peeping out from their pubic bush. How can this be if males are all supposed to be a similar size? It just doesn't make sense. The answer could be the difference between showers and growers. According to one research study, if guys grow more than 1.5 inches, they are classed as a grower. And if they grow less than that, they're a shower. Many men grew 2.1 inches in the grower category, while in the shower category, they only managed to blast off a meager 1.2 inches. Sometimes the growers grew by more than 2 inches, and sometimes the showers barely budged. Out of 274 reported participants, 73 men were growers and 205 were showers. This has a lot to do with a difference in tissue elasticity and blood flow. Hey, put your ruler away, please. There's more you need to hear about the erection. Some of you will be very aware that the extended penis doesn't always stand up straight. When it looks like the Leaning Tower of Pisa, the medical term is penile curvature. Your Leaning Tower of Penis, if indeed you have one, usually leans anywhere from 5 to 30 degrees to the side. It's more like a curve, but it's also like it's leaning. We could find no statistics about which side it leans to or how many men in total are leaners. Most have some curvature. If you're born this way, it falls into the congenital penile curvature category. It's not usually a cause for concern, but get it checked out if there's pain or if it really bothers you. It can also develop later in life, which is called Peyronie's disease. This is when scar tissue makes the penis bend, sometimes as a result of very aggressive monkey spanking or another penile injury, such as someone accidentally sitting on it while it's erect. Ouch! Again, if that causes issues, see your urologist. You might be handed a suction device to straighten things out. It seems we humans have evolved to have larger penises than our primate ancestors, which might be because women's vaginal size increased over millions of years to fit humans' bigger heads with their bigger brains. And men's willies also got bigger around that same time, so sexual satisfaction was suitable enough to cause ejaculation. Nature wants nothing more than us humans to enjoy sex, only because nature is selfish and it wants us to procreate and pass on our genes. Nature doesn't really care if the male is a grandpa and the female still studying in college. Even so, men tend to have sex less the older they get. In one study, it was discovered that people between 18 and 29 had, on average, sex 112 times a year, which is twice a week. It was 69 times a year for people who were between the ages of 40 and 49. There are many reasons why men might lose their ability to achieve an erection in older age. It's not certain that they will, but it sometimes happens due to a large number of health issues and also just because men at an older age produce less testosterone. Some men remember worrying about finishing too fast in their youth, and when they get older, it goes the other way. They can't even start. How cruel is life? Around 40% of men have some erectile problems when they're as young as 40, and by 70, about 70% of men have some sort of problem with erectile dysfunction. Another academic paper said 67% of men have erection issues, by the time they're 50 years old, and 89% of those who reach 75 do. Even so, there's no reason with some medical intervention that men need to give up on erections. Ask Robert De Niro and Mick Jagger, who had kids in their 70s, or Al Pacino, who just knocked out another kid at 83 with his 29-year-old partner, Noor Al-Fala. Men can make babies up until they die. In 2010, a man in India named Ramajit Raghav had his first child at the ripe old age of 94. No one to let age hold him back, he had another kid 2 years later. In his 90s, he said he was having sex 3 times a day, which he put down to his diet of vegetables and grains. He died in 2020, aged 104, with an erection. Just kidding. But now we need to ask if a man can overdo it with his erections. Can you overuse and abuse your male member? The philosopher priest Thomas Aquinas called masturbation an unnatural vice. The American Puritans said it was evil and wicked. An 18th century Swiss physician named Samuel Auguste Tissot wrote that it could cause nerve damage or worse, insanity and blindness. But it seems he thought that about intercourse too. And what about the guy we mentioned at the start who apparently died from his erection? According to the National Survey of Sexual Health and Behavior, which interviewed 5,865 respondents in the U.S. aged 14 to 94, the average guy in the 18 to 59 age bracket only masturbated a few times a month, or maybe just once a week. Other research said 20% of American males masturbate more than 4 times a week. The average, according to another study, said it's 14.8 times per month on average. We imagined that 0.8 was such a disappointing endeavor. That's a joke again. Other people obviously do it a lot more. On a forum, one guy wrote, "It can vary slightly, but on most days I masturbate between 1 and 3 times per day." Another guy wrote, "For me on average about 3 times a day. Got a very high sex drive." These lean, mean, stroking machines are not doing anything dangerous. It comes to them naturally. They are built for it. It's thought the average man will have 3 to 5 erections per night's sleep. And if you count the entire day, the average is more like 10 or 20 erections. In the midst of puberty, males may indeed find they're getting stiffies much more frequently. Nature didn't make it harmful to us, although psychologically speaking, something like watching too much pornography could have some negative consequences. Each of these many erections a male has in one day will last for anything from 33 seconds to 44 minutes. There is a dark side though. Some men get what seems like eternal erections. This is a condition called priapism. It could mean staying hard for 2 hours or more, and the erection can get pretty painful. In fact, it can turn into a medical emergency, which if not dealt with may mean permanent damage to the penis. This has nothing to do with the male feeling hyper-aroused. It's about the blood being stuck in there. His glass of wine doesn't return to the decanter. If you find this happens to you, for maybe 2 or at worst 4 hours, you need to go to the ER. Preferably not in your jogging pants. It's hard to say if one of those long-standing erections can kill you or if they're just there when you die. Sometimes it's referred to as a death erection or angel lust, which, as we said before, can happen when someone is hanged. But they may start when people are alive. It's very rare, but we found a case in 2021 in which an American died in a hospital after a 3-hour priapism. He had many health issues and was diagnosed with COVID-19. The British tabloids also reported about another case in which a man in Nigeria was said to have died from a prolonged erection after taking medicine known as manpower. A Nigerian newspaper said he must have died from consistent hardness. This was the story we referred to at the start of the show. The man may have had priapism, but it's more likely the tabloids exaggerated his erection and he died from some other health issue. The odds of you dying by erection are about the same as you being abducted and examined by alien physiologists. There's absolutely nothing unnatural or dangerous regarding regular penile tumescence, so all you princes of the pocket rocket are very safe. Most of you people watching this will have experienced the topic of today's show. If you haven't yet, then statistically it's very likely you will. In fact, many males of a certain age will get down with this biological buzz on a daily basis, while females might not be as prolific in producing this heavenly stimulant that nature has bestowed upon us. We might be indebted to this fleshy machine that we call our body for giving us a natural high that for the most part doesn't cost us a penny. It offers some respite from a grind of work and the endless obstacles and what can sometimes be be a difficult life. For that reason, we salute the orgasm, this wonderful gift Mother Nature has bequeathed to us. Let's now discuss the nitty-gritty of our gift in this episode of the Infographic Show, Female Orgasm versus Male. Before we start comparing orgasms, let's take a look at why we have them in the first place. Of course, we know that we have orgasms as part of the impetus to copulate with another person. This gift that makes the experience pleasurable, and in turn, we sometimes churn out other human beings and keep the species ticking over. Do all animals have orgasms though? That's something that scientists are not absolutely sure about, because we can't exactly ask a dog, a fish, or a proboscis monkey what it was like for them after they got it on. Scientists know by observing some animals' vocal cords and muscle contractions that they do seem to have this biological carnal payoff just as humans do. All female mammals have clitorises, and scientists have even stimulated non-human female primates in labs and given them orgasms. Perhaps that's the best job a monkey can get when sent to the lab for testing. They didn't say how they did the testing, however. So simply put, science thinks that most animals have sex because of the feeling they receive from it. Being the beneficiary of an orgasm is of course not the only reason animals do it. There may be power plays if there's a hierarchy, for instance, but it certainly acts as the main incentive. We don't know what it feels like for the animal, of course, but as one scientist talking to Popular Science says, it looks like a very pleasurable experience for some animals. Talking about our male feathered friends, he said the bird shudders its wings and clenches its feet as it ejaculates. Who knows whether it feels like a human orgasm, but the external behavior looks like it. We're told animals don't have the brain capacity to plan for babies. Rats don't think when they're getting it on that they can't wait to see a little rascal ratty taking its first breaths in the world. They do it for pleasure. Humans are different because we are cognizant of the consequences of lovemaking if conditions haven't been met to prevent pregnancy. But some animals also masturbate as humans do. They may not fantasize as we do or spend time and energy watching others do it for their own gratification and enhanced stimulation, but some do enjoy pleasuring themselves. These animals include other primates, the animal champs of sexual self-gratification, elephants, walruses, bats, and turtles, among many others. Some animals, such as the brown bear and wolf, even practice autofellatio. Humans generally don't have the flexibility for that. We orgasm fans know that when it happens, it is pleasurable. Our muscles contract, we feel euphoria, and then we experience a period of relaxation. We also know that orgasms are not all made equal, with some feeling like a minor bump of pleasure chemicals in our brain, while others feel more like being maligned into the ecstasies of chemical heaven. We experience what is called a neuromuscular euphoria when our brain's pleasure centers are activated. This happens because of stimulation, but that stimulation can come in many ways. We'll cut this short because all the ways one can orgasm would take a while to explain. As you probably know, even stimulation of a nipple or other erogenous zone can create this sublime feeling. Some people even orgasm in their dreams, when thought alone is the main driver. There's even something called foot orgasm syndrome, which you can work out for yourself. It's unusual to say the least and apparently not pleasant. But for men, they mostly orgasm when their penis or scrotum is stimulated, and something called the pudendal nerve sends signals to the brain. It's the same for women when their clitoris is stimulated. Both sexes can orgasm from stimulation of their rectum when the pelvic nerve is stimulated. The hypogastric nerve sends signals from a man's prostate, while it does the same in a woman's uterus and cervix. For women, the vagus nerve comes into play when the cervix, uterus, and vagina is stimulated. These are what we might call the main bases. When orgasm is achieved, your brain is flooded with neurochemicals, and these activate what we call the brain's reward systems. It's these reward systems that motivate us to do certain things, not just have sex, but perhaps complete a marathon or get a job done. Sexual arousal affects many areas of the brain, such as the amygdala, cerebellum, pituitary gland, nucleus accumbens, and ventral tegmental area. If all that terminology means little to you, the Journal of Neuroscience simply tells us that sexual arousal in terms of brain patterns looks similar to what happens in the brain when one takes heroin. Thankfully, sexual stimulation isn't as expensive and doesn't produce severe withdrawal symptoms after long-term use. Wouldn't that make a dent in our masturbating regimen? For men, the result of this orgasm is usually the release of fluid through the penis. That may contain semen. Dry outcomes are possible too. All sorts of things come into play here, but usually with enough testosterone, the male can send his homemade gunge into a female orifice or simply into open space. Prior to this, the man is aroused and his penis becomes erect due to blood racing up the appendage's arteries at high speeds. The blood rush causes hardness, and the rest of the body tenses. Houston, Get ready for liftoff. This may take a while, but orgasm can be achieved in as quickly as 30 seconds from the first arousal. At this time, the heart might be beating around 150 to 175 beats per minute, while parts of the body might be moving involuntarily. Nature now plays an ace card by secreting a pre-ejaculatory fluid in the penis, which helps protect the arriving sperm by changing the pH balance in the urethra. All you men know is that when it's time for liftoff, there's no going back, and this is called ejaculatory inevitability, a fine term if we ever heard one. Muscles around the penis and anus will contract rapidly, and you may push out your pelvis, and all those chemicals flood the brain and possibly cause one to grimace wildly like a madman in the grips of an ecstatic seizure. But it's not over yet. Men go through a pleasant recovery stage, a kind of easy come-down plateau after the rush, and they will see their member slowly reduce to its original, unimpressive state. Younger guys can sometimes recover from this in as little as 15 minutes, while older men may require hours to go through it all again. There seems to be a lot of content out there on what it feels like to have a female orgasm, and not much on the feeling of the male orgasm. As we said, orgasms are not all the same. Perhaps a seasoned masturbator on his 5th adult video session of the day might have a few substandard climaxes in that day's orgasm medley. But when one is orgasmed for the first time with the love of his life, the feeling might be somewhat more intense. One description we found online said this of his orgasms: like a tickle that creeps up from every corner of your body until you're desperate for it to stop, and also to continue forever, as if squeegees are scraping through your limbs, like a gunshot, startling and discreet, leaving you with the vibrations, the trembling steel, the blowback. That sounds good. And the reason many men during sex or masturbation will be thinking about the next round before the current is even finished, but they often change their mind immediately after orgasm. That's just because they've achieved a satisfactory result and the brain is contented, at least for a while. Again, we have this feeling, so we'll want to do it again and again. Men are blessed with this. Some may argue that they were cursed, so that the merry-go-round of life continues to spin. It's as simple as that. With that in mind, let's turn to women. Women could still procreate even if they didn't have an orgasm. Women don't need to achieve orgasm to have babies, so why are they blessed with this blissful treatment from nature? There's been much research about this. First, we should say that 10% of women don't orgasm through sexual intercourse, or not at all, even with their own hands or certain purpose-made instruments. Some sources say it may be as high as 15%. You can read things like this on the web. I don't understand. I feel like less of a woman because I can't have an orgasm, and I want to so bad. I feel incomplete sometimes after sex. Vice magazine cited what it called the biggest ever orgasm study, which told us that nearly 37% of American women required clitoral stimulation to experience orgasm, while 18% said that vaginal stimulation did the trick. 9% of women in that study said that nothing worked, not clitoris rubbing, cunnilingus, pulsating plastic toys, or penetrative sex. 66.6% of these women did say they enjoyed their clitoris being stimulated, usually with an up and down rubbing motion with medium pressure of perhaps their own or their partner's digit. As for why women orgasm at all, science is not agreed on this. Some experts tell us that the reason is because orgasm will help a woman find a man of better genetic quality. Women may not orgasm with a man of lower genetic quality, and so we're told the fact that they can orgasm will weed out the weaker men. Not everyone agrees with this theory though. Some scientists compare the female orgasm to the male nipple, in that it serves little evolutionary function. Another theory is that orgasms in women will make them want to have sex with as many men as possible, and this increases the possibility of getting pregnant and promote what you could call sperm competition. Others suggest that her orgasm will help bond a pair and so ensure that the child has two parents. Orgasming in unison is quite a beautiful thing, perhaps sometimes even spiritual, and maybe that bonds a couple. This doesn't say much about many animals though, that are hardly monogamous. It's an ongoing debate. Now, let's look at the female orgasm in terms of what happens physiologically. Like men, women's orgasms can be vastly different. Sometimes they may feel like they've been rocketed to the moon and back, and sometimes they're a mere fulfilling glitch in an otherwise unspectacular day. Like a man, the woman will experience a rush of happy chemicals to the brain. She may also contract and convulse and exhibit facial expressions that can border on being frightening. Again, we can't talk for all women and all orgasms. We can see what some women say about their orgasms though. One woman told Cosmopolitan, "The pleasure builds up and I feel it coming. Then an explosion of pleasure takes over everything from the waist down. The feeling trickles down through my legs and everything is completely relaxed." As you can see, this doesn't sound too different from what men say. It can also sound like more hard work though, as this woman explains. It's like a warm, tingling wave that starts at your center and just radiates outward. It can be frustratingly
blissful as you start to build and then lose it, and then build again, and each time you start to climb that mountain, it becomes more intense and desperate. Perhaps we could say a man is a rocket with a certain trajectory, and a woman is more a complex machine with a few more moves before it achieves liftoff. The experts tell us that is correct, in that the female orgasm is more complex. She may have multiple orgasms or even what are called blended orgasms. If you've ever been the sole contributor of such an orgasm, you'll know it can last longer than the male orgasm and come with many shakes, involuntary convulsions, and perhaps the man being gripped onto tightly as she experiences her bit of physical bliss. Women can also have relaxation orgasms and tension orgasms, which should be self-explanatory. As you know, this orgasm might be clitoral, vaginal, or from G-spot stimulation, or even other happy zones such as lips or nipples. They can be grand, they can be minor, and they can move mountains or barely eclipse normality. Unlike men, women can have a remarkable variety of orgasmic experiences, which evolve throughout the lifespan, said one academic. A woman's erotic body map is not etched in stone, but rather is an ongoing process of experience, discovery, and construction. Now, men sound rather dull and predictable. We're also told that women become more lost in the moment during orgasm and the build up to it, that they block out everything else. Does that mean, like some men, they could be thinking about an upcoming football game or how they're performing during copulation? Yes, that could happen too, if she's not into it. But as one writer said, if she is, we lose our usual self-awareness and consciousness of other noises, feelings, and smells around us. Described like this, it sounds what we might call more full-on, as if the woman is not the astronaut taking off but the rocket itself. It sounds like it could be almost an out-of-body experience that lasts longer too, about 20 seconds compared to that short blast that the men get. But in terms of what happens to our brains, we're not that different. Women might have different kinds of orgasms and essentially things might seem different, but that heroin hit we get is both present in men and women. We may be different in how quickly we get aroused, usually easier for men, but as Psychology Today tells us, the orgasmic experience is almost identical in both sexes. This means heart rate, blood pressure, tensed muscles, and the release of the love chemical oxytocin. Nature didn't get too complicated in this respect and made us both similar. We feel the same love buzz of an orgasm, and for this we can be thankful, as we can empathize and know what joy we can give to each other. We are different in some respects though, in that men self-administer orgasms more often. In spite of some remaining social taboos preventing some women from pleasuring themselves as often as they might, the Kinsey Institute tells us that men are just hardwired to beat off. Call it practice for the big day that an orgasm might result in the beating heart of another wonderfully constructed human being.
Maybe it was love at first sight, or perhaps it's finally wedding bells for the happy couple. Either way, today is ending only in one way, with sweet marital bliss in the bedroom. That's right, it's time for a bit of How's Your Father, as our British cousins would say, or to lay one down for Old Glory for our American viewers. But what's all the fireworks business about? What exactly is an orgasm, and why do we do it? And why does it feel so good? It's time to quit the laughing and snickering in the back row, because Infographics is putting on a sex ed class. Hey, it could be worse. It could be your parents teaching you this stuff. The word orgasm comes from the Greek word orgasmos, meaning excitement or swelling, and is typically the culmination of sexual intercourse, though not always. For men, an orgasm is the grand crashing symbol, and the older you get, the more likely it'll be that it's a one-shot performance for the evening. In males, orgasms come in two stages, the emission of semen and then a refractory period, during which the male must recover before another orgasm is possible. Unlike women, men are physiologically incapable of having a second orgasm until their recovery period is up, as their bodies need more time to recover from the physical exertion of the emission of semen. And the male body does indeed come under incredible exertion when it ejaculates, shooting semen at a whopping 10 miles an hour, fast enough to get you a speeding ticket in most hospital emergency room zones. That speed and the orgasm that builds the body up to generating it are crucial, though, for the ultimate purpose of making the beast with two backs, pregnancy. Sperm have a long, twisting road ahead of them if they want to fulfill their life's goal of fertilizing an egg, and the extra speed helps propel them along, a goodbye gift from their donor, you. Unlike many women, men are completely unable to halt their orgasm once they begin the process. Once you pull that ripcord, there's no going back in the plane, guys, so you better be sure you're clear for landing. The male orgasm begins seconds before ejaculation, with the testicles and penis contracting powerfully as the semen races from the storage to blast off, and about 3 seconds later, the inevitable happens. The greater pleasure a man feels during an orgasm, the greater the volume of ejaculate, helping ensure pregnancy by delivering more egg-fertilizing semen to the woman.
Female orgasms are both similar and different from male orgasms. For starters, they're far more complicated affairs and require a greater amount of stimulation or concentration to achieve. Men might be the wild shooting pistoleros of the Wild West, firing off every which way, but women require greater focus and greater effort to achieve their orgasm. To even the score, though, women are capable of repeated orgasms with no interruption between. Unlike their male counterpart, which needs longer and longer periods of rest in between an orgasm the older they get. As long as a woman's stimulation doesn't dip below plateau levels, she can orgasm very quickly after the first, while her male partner might need a long breather. Now, women may be capable of more frequent orgasms, but achieving an orgasm is typically much harder for a woman than a man. While a man's nerve endings run along the head and shaft of the penis, a woman's vagina has far fewer nerve endings overall, and thus regular penetration might not be sufficient for an orgasm. The most common way for a woman to orgasm instead is through stimulation of the clitoris, which is packed with the nerve endings and is very sensitive. Sometimes the clitoris can be stimulated through regular vaginal penetration, but most of the time it must be specifically stimulated. Because it's homologous to the penis, the clitoris is packed with over 8,000 nerve endings, giving it as great sensitivity or possibly greater as the male penis. Overall, the interior of the vagina has less nerve endings than the male penis, which makes it difficult for women to orgasm during normal penetrative sex. Some biologists believe that the difficulty in achieving a female orgasm might be due to the fact that it serves a far lesser role in reproduction than the male orgasm. Men, which carry the sperm needed to fertilize an egg, need a physiological process by which to release that sperm only at the proper time. If the process of having an orgasm was easier, i.e. if a man could have an orgasm with far less stimulation, it might lead to orgasms in situations that serve no reproductive purpose, wasting precious sperm and the energy required to produce it. By requiring protracted and pleasurable stimulation of the penis, the body ensures that precious sperm is delivered only under the very specific circumstances of reproduction. In essence, the orgasm is like the safety on a gun, preventing it from going off except for under very specific circumstances. While conserving sperm might not seem like a big deal, producing it is in fact a costly endeavor in terms of precious energy, and evolution always plays things conservatively. When our ancestors were running around the African savannas and hunting for their next meal, every ounce of energy that could be conserved helped ensure our continued survival. It's exactly because of the nature of the male orgasm, though, that leads some biologists to posit that the female orgasm is purely vestigial, a leftover trait from when we were far more primitive life forms. After all, for the process of reproduction, the female orgasm doesn't seem to have any obvious use, and data on it is both rare and inconclusive, though 3 theories exist as to the presence of the female orgasm. The first is known as the Pollack's theory. As it states, the female orgasm helps the woman to relax, which in turn encourages her to lie down. Lying down is believed to help semen travel to its destination with greater ease, but the data on this is very inconclusive. The second theory is the upsuck theory, which posits that the contractions involved in the female orgasm helps to hoover up male sperm. In some studies conducted, the amount of male sperm that leaked out of the vagina shortly after sex was less in women who had experienced an orgasm shortly before male ejaculation. This might also help move sperm deeper into the woman's reproductive system to ensure fertility. The third theory is that the orgasm once served an evolutionary purpose but does not do so any longer. It's thought that for a woman, an orgasm once kicked open the doors to ovulation, making them primed for reproduction. This, after all, is true about cats today, as the female will not ovulate if she hasn't copulated yet. Evolutionarily speaking, this would be a major advantage to our ancient ancestors, as it would ensure that fertilization and the ensuing pregnancy would come at a desired time with a desired partner. As a form of birth control, the orgasm would have ensured that a woman was truly ready to have a child, as it would have required multiple sessions of intercourse to begin the process of ovulation. This would prevent unwanted pregnancy from rape or unsuitable partners, and the female could hold off until situations were optimal for the inevitable pregnancy to follow. With one of the world's longest-lasting pregnancies, having a child was an incredible investment of time and energy, and our ancient ancestors might have needed the orgasm to help them control reproduction until the environment and the social situation was suitable for childbirth. This remains only a theory, however, as it's unlikely that men who experience a very powerful evolutionary urge to procreate would have willingly submitted themselves to extremely long periods of chastity. Another theory is that the female orgasm serves to emotionally bond a woman with her lover, and indeed, during both the male and female orgasm, the brain releases bonding chemicals that work to make us feel closer to our sexual partner. As a strong family unit was critical for child rearing during our ancient past, This would have been a great boost to ensure that a male remained with his pregnant partner and helped provide for her and the child. Likewise, the bonding chemicals released by the female orgasm would make a woman more likely to stick with her partner and increase the odds of his own successful fertilization. In a way, the female orgasm might have been an evolutionary trick to help men by making women more likely to stay with their partner long enough to get pregnant by him. The vagina and the penis, however, aren't the only way to orgasm. Both men and women, though men much more frequently, can orgasm from anal stimulation. For both sexes, nerve endings can be found in great quantities around and just inside the anus, and stimulation of these can lead to orgasm. A male orgasm resulting from anal stimulation is typically longer, more pleasurable, and more widespread than a traditional orgasm. The same can be said for women, though the proximity of the pudendal nerve, which runs via offshoots to the clitoris, can lead to much easier orgasms for women than men. Recently, though, doctors confirmed a long-standing rumor that women could achieve orgasms via stimulation of their nipples alone. A study in 2011 using an MRI machine discovered that during stimulation of the nipples, some women were able to achieve an orgasm. The doctors discovered that the pleasurable sensations from nipple stimulation traveled to the same area of the brain that receives sensations from the vagina, clitoris, and cervix, and could thus create orgasms in small amounts of the female population. Evolution is all about one thing and one thing only: creating the next generation and successfully passing one's genes down. For this purpose, the orgasm is both a compelling tool for procreation and a physiological process to ensure successful fertilization. While most monkeys and apes are believed to orgasm, it's not known if other animals do, and it may be only us and our nearest ancestors that get to experience these happy little endings. Women put up with a lot of pain in their lives between childbirth and conditions like endometriosis, but let's not leave the men out of it. These are 10 conditions that usually only happen to men, and they are the most painful around. It's almost a ritual for young boys the first time you get kicked in the nuts. You might have been horsing around with friends, or maybe your older brother decided it'd be funny to convince you to play a game of who's tougher. He goes first, of course. One thing's for sure, you might have fallen out of trees and skidded halfway across gravel playgrounds without batting an eyelash, but the first nut shot is probably the most painful thing you've ever experienced. You double over, tears coming out of your eyes, and probably you let out a scream or some choice curse words. What about getting kicked in this specific spot causes so much pain? It's all a part of the wonder of the human reproductive system. Testicles are designed to be part of sex and are packed with nerve endings to make sex more enjoyable. But with great pleasure comes great pain, which is not a superhero quote. That added sensitivity is a double-edged sword because pressure on this area causes extreme pain. Plus, while many areas of the body are covered by a protective covering of muscle or bone, the testicles are exposed and just hanging out there. That's why they're easy to injure. You can essentially kick yourself in the testicles by sitting down the wrong way. When the coach advises you to put on your cup in case a ball goes sailing the wrong way, you should probably listen, because a hard impact to the balls can cause serious problems. Usually, an impact to the testicles doesn't require medical intervention. Just lay down, take some mild painkillers, and get an ice pack to prevent swelling. But if the pain doesn't subside after an hour, or you notice other danger signs like bruising, nausea, blood in your urine, or damage to the protective sac of the testicles, it might be time to seek medical attention. Not only can an injury cause extended discomfort if left untreated, but a hard enough kick can cause testicles to rupture, which can cause infertility or even death if an infection gets into the bloodstream. Maybe the next time your brother suggests that favorite game of his, it's better to play Mario Kart instead. But it's not the worst thing that can happen to the testicles. The testicles are very important organs. They hold the future of the human race inside them, which makes it kind of silly that they're so fragile. They don't even need to be injured by an outside force. When something twists just the wrong way, they can essentially strangle themselves. This is testicular torsion, a condition that happens when the spermatic cord that holds the testicle twists, cutting off the testicle from its blood flow and slowly depriving it of the energy it needs to stay alive. As soon as this happens, it's usually accompanied by intense pain in the testicles, something not as extreme as a sharp kick, but usually more persistent and impossible to avoid long term. While this is sometimes caused by a congenital malformation, it often happens to people who have no risk factors. So, is there any way to avoid this? Most of the common risk factors include age and body type. It happens most often in newborns who can't express the "hey, my balls hurt" the way older people can, or during puberty when there's sudden growth and the testicles have yet to fully descend. The other main risk factor is trauma, particularly the slow pressure caused by frequent bicycle riding. While this is a small percentage of cases, it's significant enough for many cyclists to check down there regularly while they're doing heavy riding. Oddly, it seems like cold weather months might make this condition more likely to happen, although the cause is uncertain. And when someone's worried about it, they should do something about it quickly. Testicular torsion won't be ignored. It's usually accompanied by extreme pain in the testicle and stomach, and that's because it's running on a ticking clock. Not only is it painful, but the testicle is being starved and slowly dying. The best approach is to head to a doctor or hospital immediately, so they can try to manually manipulate the testicle back into place. If this doesn't work, the next step is surgery to manipulate the spermatic cord back into position. This is usually a simple operation, but one that has to be done quickly. There's only a 12-hour window in most cases before the testicle dies and has to be removed. In this case, the intense pain is a warning sign. Listen to it and save a testicle. It's not the only case where the genitals betray men. It's not often a disease that makes its way into the tabloids, but the President of the United States' genitalia became the subject of national debate when Paula Jones described Bill Clinton's anatomy and said his penis had a distinctive curve. While it's never proven true or false, if it was true, Clinton's member might have been one of the many afflicted with Peyronie's disease. This is a connective tissue disorder that affects the soft tissues of the penis, causing scar tissue and fibrous plaques to grow, affecting the thin sheath of tissue surrounding the erectile tissue. Normally, the penis looks normal, but when the man becomes aroused and has an erection, it affects the shape of the penis, and it has a nasty tendency to turn pleasure into pain in a hurry. The penis is normally a little curved when erect, but this condition, it can get extreme. In severe cases, it causes large lesions and can even cause the penis to bend as if it has an extra joint. It can not only cause extreme pain, but can make it much more difficult to have an erection. After all, if every case of sexual arousal results in shooting pain down there, it's going to be pretty difficult to keep feeling hot. This can make it difficult to have sex as well as have long-term psychological effects. Men suffering from Peyronie's disease often report feeling inadequate and being self-conscious about what they look like down there. So what causes this disease? Is there any way to avoid it? The bad news is the top risk factor is one every man will experience, or at least they hope to. It becomes more common with age, with up to 10% of men eventually experiencing it. However, it can also be caused by diabetes, repeated injuries to the penis, which cause abnormal scar tissue growth, and excessive consumption of alcohol or tobacco. It's more common in people of European background, and people are more likely to have it if they have a family history of it. While there is no cure, it can be treated through physical therapy to slowly pull the penis back into shape using a traction device, although this can be more uncomfortable than the original condition. Sometimes the problems go deeper. The prostate is a small gland, but it's responsible for a lot, including the production of semen and the unique switch that lets men both pee and ejaculate without crossing the streams. It's an important little part of the body, and when something goes wrong, it can be a big pain. The prostate is vulnerable to a condition called prostatitis, and many men have it without even knowing it. That's because many of the cases are asymptomatic, consisting of an inflamed prostate but no associated pain. Doctors often discover it during a urology visit and recommend treatments before it becomes a problem, because if it proceeds to a later stage, it can result in urinary tract infections. And that's just the beginning, because it can cause some serious pain. If it advances to the most serious phase, acute prostatitis, it becomes a serious bacterial infection that can be a serious medical emergency. Signs include chills and fever, difficulty urinating, and inflammation and pain in the genital area or lower back. If doctors examine the prostate by probing through the rectum, they'll often find that it's extremely sensitive and painful, often by the patient yelling at the top of their lungs as soon as the gloved finger makes contact. This is a common condition after a patient has a prostate biopsy to check for cancer cells and is much more common in older patients. And when it happens, it's time to go into crisis mode. When acute prostatitis can be treated, it's important to catch it early. This increases the odds that a patient can be treated with antibiotics and sent home to rest. If left untreated, it can result in elevated white blood cell counts and even sepsis and immunocompromised patients. If the antibiotics aren't doing their work and the patient shows a high fever, they'll usually be admitted to the hospital for intravenous antibiotics. One of the biggest side effects of acute prostatitis is difficulty urinating, which might result in the need for a catheter. But most patients recover fully without it becoming a recurring problem, although the diagnosis and treatment can often be painful and make many men self-conscious. The next pain isn't exclusive to men, but it can be much worse for them. Anatomy is a tricky thing, and one little nerve ending out of place can be a real big pain, literally. That's the case with the pudendal nerve, located in the pelvis near the cavities known as Alcock's Canal. It can easily get compressed and trapped in this area, leading to complications with nerve function in that most sensitive area. It's usually associated with intense pressure on the pelvic region, which is often why it's nicknamed cyclist syndrome. The first symptom isn't pain, it's numbness. While there's no standard test for the disorder, the first sign is usually when you start to feel your butt fall asleep. This has probably happened to most people during a long bus ride, and immediately they stand up and try to stretch their legs a little. But if they don't, things can get messy. If the nerve gets compressed for too long, it can start to wreak havoc in function around the area. First, the genitals and anus become numb, very inconvenient for anyone with an active sex life. This also can cause trouble with bathroom function, making it hard to tell when you need to go. Men also report that it makes the feeling of ejaculation change, and when the sensation does return, it can be associated with intense burning pain, similar to the kind that happens when your arm comes back to life after a very awkward night of sleeping on it. And when there's reduced sensation, it comes with an increased risk of injury from other causes. Fortunately, this condition can be alleviated easier than most. Usually, at the first sign of the disorder, it's recommended to change your behavior. The nerve usually becomes compressed through excess pressure, and reducing the pressure can keep the symptoms from getting worse. But for many cyclists, that's not an option. There's a race to train for. Physical therapists can help people develop better posture or use exercises to loosen the tension, but if the disorder is allowed to progress to the point where the symptoms become severe, a combination of medications and injections can improve the symptoms in most cases. While some doctors in a few countries claim to perform surgery to relieve tension, this is controversial and most doctors prefer less invasive techniques. It's not the only case where sitting can cause problems. The term trucker's butt probably creates funny visuals of a big guy bending over to pick up a quarter and exposing, well, just about everything. But it's actually a major problem that affects countless people each year, mostly men. Officially called pilonidal disease, it's what happens when a cyst forms at the upper end of the butt cheeks. It's estimated to affect 3 in every 10,000 people. And the cause is unexpected: body hair. Men have a lot more of it than women, so it's rare for it to affect women. And men also have a lot more of the common risk factors. It starts with itching and discomfort around the affected area, and it leads to a large lump forming around it, often leaking and causing stains on the underpants. But if it becomes acute, it can be unbearable. The problem comes when the pleonidal cyst becomes infected and is unable to drain. Then, suddenly, it can swell up quickly and make it impossible to sit down, a major problem for students or people who sit down for a living, like truck drivers. It's most likely to affect those who are overweight and don't exercise often, but the biggest contributing factor is ingrown hair. Moisture fills the cavity where the hair grows, leading to bacterial growth, which leads to infection. And while people can have this condition for years without having any real symptoms, once it becomes an acute issue, the person might not be able to function without getting it treated. Fortunately, there are multiple choices for treatment. If it's not at the acute stage, treating it with antibiotics can make it go dormant again, but it can recur at any time, often at the worst possible time. If it's swelling up and painful, a doctor can cut open the cyst and let it drain, relieving the pain and letting the patient get back to work. But to cure a pleonidal cyst, it often takes surgery to not only drain the cyst, but then to remove the tissue and the nest of hair causing it to be infected. While the surgery is relatively non-invasive and usually done under local anesthesia, it can have a long recovery period, which makes it difficult to sit down, which is why many sufferers choose to relieve the symptoms but not actually treat the disease. Inactivity leads to this disease, but activity often leads to this next one. The human body is a fragile thing, with hundreds of organs and muscles working together to keep us functioning. If one thing gets out of place, things can get messy. That's the case with the abdominal cavity, filled with organs that are kept in place by the inguinal canal. When things get a little out of place, that's called a hernia, and it can be both unsightly and deeply uncomfortable. The first sign is the protrusion of a large lump on one side of the groin. It doesn't always cause immediate symptoms, which is why many people ignore it at first. But if it's allowed to proceed, it can cause serious pain. People report intense discomfort, especially when coughing, using the bathroom, or being physically active. But could that last one be the cause as well? Many men report that their hernia started when they lifted something heavy, and it's common among laborers. But doctors aren't sure if there's a manual cause to the disorder, and instead point out that many of the patients have other risk factors, including smoking, heart and kidney disease, obesity, and past surgeries. It's also a genetic risk factor, and people who have previously had an invasive vasectomy might be especially susceptible. While women can get inguinal hernias and pregnancy is a risk factor, it's rare. Only 2% of women get them in their lifetime, while around a quarter of men do without pushing new life out of their body. And in the past, the cure might have been worse than the disease. Until recently, elective surgery was recommended to cure hernias and involved the use of a belt to hold the gut in place. While this provided a cosmetic improvement and more support when the wearer was lifting things, it had possible long-term consequences. Today, doctors advise against surgery in minor cases, although surgical repair is more common in women who can have more complications because of the location of their arteries. When doctors do perform surgery, they often use laparoscopic techniques to create tiny incisions and allow the patient to get back to work more quickly. For men with minor hernias, they're usually advised to watch it carefully, because in extreme cases, the hernia can start strangling the contents of the abdomen and cause life-threatening complications. What's worse? How about agonizing pain every time you pee? Both men and women have urethras, the canal that lets them pee. But men have a longer one that extends through the penis, and that makes it much more vulnerable to urethral strictures, or the narrowing of the canal that makes every trip to the urinal a visit with pain. The first signs of this include a weak stream of pee, as well as a splashing in unusual directions and needing to make frequent trips to the bathroom in a hurry. In more serious cases, it can make every time painful and unsatisfying and lead to a urinary tract and prostate infections. But in some cases, it can become a medical emergency if the tract becomes so narrow that the bladder can't empty and is at risk of rupture. So what causes the urethra to betray men everywhere? It's usually caused by scar tissue in the urethra, including from surgery or infection, and it can be caused by the use of surgical tools like a catheter that affects the urethra. But the most common cause is injury. A pelvic fracture that compresses the area can cause lasting trauma. But it can also be caused by more common injuries like getting kicked square in the penis. Getting kicked in the testicles may be more intensely painful, but a sharp kick in a certain area can lead to far more serious consequences. So what's to be done to get the waterworks flowing smoothly again? If it's an emergency where the patient is unable to urinate, they'll likely be given a catheter in the emergency room to bypass the urethra or have a surgical procedure to drain the bladder in more severe cases. But in less acute cases, the doctor concentrates on getting things moving without extreme measures. This can include manual dilation, which can be painful and make things worse in the long run, but also cell therapy to try to repair the damage. However, in most extreme cases, doctors perform a urethroplasty to reconstruct the canal and replace the scar tissue with healthy tissue from a skin graft. Whew, that's enough to make you grateful for every time you belly up to the urinal, even if that guy always stands next to you. But it's not the worst thing men feel while taking a whiz. You probably heard it all the time from your mom. Make sure you drink enough water, you don't want to get a kidney stone. Turns out she was right, because many people report kidney stones as being the most painful thing they've ever experienced in their life. This is when the concentration of minerals in the kidneys gets so high that it forms a solid piece of material that then tries to leave the exact same way as everything else produced by the kidneys, through your urine. Needless to say, the urethra was not meant to handle the little irregularly shaped rocks, especially when they reach a certain size. Many tiny kidney stones may pass through the urine stream without ever being noticed, only causing momentary pain. But when they make themselves known, watch out. When kidney stones form in the kidney, the first sign is often a serious pain that goes from the side of the groin, and it can be extreme. Sufferers report having to go to the bathroom more often, being unable to rest, having blood in the urine, and even feeling nauseous due to the intensity of the pain. With most people, they're just given painkillers and told to wait to pass it, which can be excruciating and escalate the pain as it gets closer to the exit. Anyone can get kidney stones, with the biggest risk factor being dehydration, high protein intake, and underlying medical conditions like Crohn's disease. But it's also much more common in men. So why are men plagued by these stones? Over 10% of men will have kidney stones in their lives, compared to just over 5% of women. And men are also more likely to have extreme cases that require medical treatment. If someone's unable to pass a stone on their own, the doctor is likely to start by prescribing some medication that might help to break it up. They also can use a machine to deliver pulses of ultrasonic energy to break up the stone without any treatment. But in most extreme cases, they can use surgery to remove the largest stones. But just because one stone is gone doesn't mean the ordeal is over. People who get kidney stones are likely to have them recur, so listen to mom and keep on drinking that water. But there is one pain that men fear more than any other. This isn't a medical condition caused by repetitive stress or your body betraying you. It's caused by one slip-up at the urinal. You're finishing up, shaking, tucking things back in, and your member makes an unfortunate reappearance just as you're zipping up. Instant agony. And trying to pull back makes things even worse. You're caught in the most embarrassing injury possible for men everywhere: the zipper malfunction. Made famous by Ben Stiller in the famous 1990s romantic comedy There's Something About Mary, it's unfortunately not Hollywood fiction. It happens to hundreds of men a year, many of whom need medical attention. But fortunately, it's not all that likely to happen to you. There are a couple of common risk factors that most people won't fall into. If you're healthy, competent, and sober, the odds are you'll be able to stop in your tracks when something's in the way. But there is one group that should watch themselves: the drunk. Party guy Joe goes to the bathroom after throwing back a few too many, and suddenly the party's over. Being drunk hurts your reaction time, and this is probably one of the worst risks, besides getting behind the wheel or doing a handstand on the balcony. So, what happens if the worst happens? First of all, you'll be tempted to pull it free. It might seem easy, just roll the zipper back, but that's likely to be extremely painful. Same for trying to pull it loose. This could cause a nasty tear with massive bleeding. So, as embarrassing as it is, just call 911. They'll know what to do. They've seen this situation many times before, probably too many. At the hospital, doctors know how to numb the area and extricate the foreskin from the zipper. The good news is, while it's extremely painful and embarrassing, the zipper malfunction rarely causes permanent damage. The pain usually makes people stop before they actually damage the penile tissue, and the skin can usually be repaired with stitches and bandages. So, zipper malfunction survivors will usually be fine. The male body. What a wonder of engineering it is. It contains half the genetic information needed to reproduce and continue civilization. It can produce milk but has useless nipples, and it has the uncanny ability to get an erection at the absolute worst of times. Prepare to be fascinated. Number 50. Male fetuses actually get erections while they're in the womb. And while no one can be absolutely sure why it happens, some reports state it's just to keep the thing healthy. Number 49. Men also have a G-spot. You can find it by pressing on your prostate. For reference, that's about 2 inches from the entrance of your anus. Number 48. Men over 50 might start growing breasts. This is due to the anomalous hormone production that happens as we age. Number 47. It differs from man to man, but in general, a healthy guy will ejaculate 40 million sperm in one go. Still, a man could produce anything up to 200 million sperm each time. You heard that right. That's more people than live in most countries. Number 46. According to one study that was published in the U.S. National Institutes of Health, the member of an American male had an average size of 5.1 to 5.5 inches when fully erect. The study didn't mention how it got its volunteers stimulated in order to measure them at their fullest, but it did confirm the sizes were professionally measured, not self-reported, so there was no room for the men to lie. Number 45. Nationality doesn't impact the size of your member. The conclusion in one study consisted of over 15,000 men from across the world was that the average penis size was 5.17 inches. Genetic factors have a much bigger influence according to a paper by the Nature journal, but does size even matter? Number 44. Studies have shown that if it's a one-night thing, women on average like a larger phallus, with research showing that they prefer a penis around 6.3 inches in length and 4.8 inches around, which, as you know, is larger than the average. But did size correlate with pleasure? We also looked at anecdotal accounts from women, and as you'd expect, every woman had her unique take on the penis. The consensus was that there had to be a balance, not too long and not too short, with one woman saying, "He had these moves that compensated for his size. Small penises aren't bad at all, if the man knows how to use it." Okay, one last thing about your precious product down there. Number 43. We've all heard about growers versus showers, but is there any truth to it? A study by Healthline showed that 26% of men are growers, with the rest being showers. This is because of a person-to-person difference in how much collagen there is in the penis, which is genetic. The amount of collagen might mean you're a grower or a shower. The amount of blood flow may also make a difference. What's hilarious is that at the bottom of the article, Healthline explained how men can measure their penis, from the base of the shaft, of course, but they also gave this important bit of advice: just don't do it in public. Now, a special mention not to the penis, but to the bulge. Number 42. Throughout history, there's been a preference for a smaller penis, but in cultures, a big one was a sign of greater manhood. For example, in Norse mythology, there is a proud reference to a man whose bratwurst is almost as big as a horse's. Alright, now for some fast-fire facts. Number 41. Men typically have darker hair than women, with one reason being their higher levels of melanin. Number 40. The American Academy of Sleep Medicine said around 40% of men are chronic snorers, but only 24% of women habitually make that noise from hell. Number 39. You might have heard that if he has large feet, then his member will be large too, but this is just another myth in a long list of myths when it comes to the penis. Number 38. Semen is not just a load of sperm. According to one scientist's website, it also contains citric acid, free amino acids, fructose, enzymes, phosphorylcholine, prostaglandin, potassium, and zinc. Number 37. Men tend to have a faster metabolism. Due to the fact that they usually have more muscle than women, that means that even if they're just sitting around, they'll be burning more calories. But are men's and women's brains different? Number 36. If you say that men and women have different brains, you run the risk of being accused of neurosexism. We don't want that to happen to us, but we did read some scientific articles that told us that some parts of the brain might be different in the sexes. Some research says because of the different brain structures, men might be better on average at completing spatial and motor tasks. At the same time, though, women might be better at learning languages and expressing emotions. Remember, though, not all scientists agree on this. Number 35. On average, a man might have 3 to 5 erections every night while he's sleeping, and some of the erections might last as long as 30 minutes. This might have nothing to do with a wet dream or the fact that he's just cozied up closer to his lover. It's a natural phenomenon that scientists call nocturnal penile tumescence. We imagine some of you guys out there have on occasions woken up in the morning and felt something very stiff down there. Or perhaps your girlfriend has stood back in shock and said, "Oh dear, whatever could that be in your pajama pocket?" Morning wood is absolutely normal. The reason it happens down there is something called the parasympathetic nervous system. It can be stimulated at night since it doesn't switch off during sleep. But why it happens during the night is something science isn't so sure about. Number 34. If you don't get any stiffies throughout the night, there might be a problem. In fact, one study said 52% of grown men experience some kind of erectile dysfunction, with it happening more when men pass the age of 40. Still, a study published in the Journal of Sexual Medicine said 26% of men under 40 also experience erectile dysfunction. The main culprits are booze and drugs in the short term, but in the longer term, diabetes, high blood pressure, and high cholesterol, Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis, obesity, depression, and anxiety can all affect the ability to make the man stand to attention and stay that way for a useful amount of time. Number 33. In a study titled Prevalence of Pubic Hair Grooming-Related Injuries, it was said that 25% of groomers reported an injury, but this study also included female groomers. How bad can the injury be? Number 32. The absolute worst thing we could find related to cutting and shaving injuries down there was something called Fournier gangrene. Simply put, if there really was hell in this world, then this disease would be Satan's proudest achievement. It's described as a necrotic infection of the scrotum or catastrophic gangrene of the penis, and in some cases, it's happened when someone has nicked their scrotum while grooming. Thankfully, it is very rare. Amen to that. Number 31. A gastroenterologist working at Princeton named Anish Sheth wrote an entire book on poo, from what colors mean to how solid they are. He also wrote about something he called poophoria, which is when a person has an orgasm while dropping the kids off at a pool. He said for some people it can be like having a religious experience due to it feeling so good. He said that this kind of stool high is related to the vagus nerve being stimulated, adding the stool high is relatively safe, but can become an addiction for some. Number 30. Did you know that men have thicker skin than women? They do, and it's because of testosterone. In fact, one study showed that on average, men had 10 to 20% thicker skin. This can also be good news to some vain men, because this is one reason why many healthy men don't age as fast as women. How you age, though, is obviously partly determined by your genes and, more importantly, all the environmental factors the skin experiences over the years. Alright, now we'll settle that argument between you and your partner, if you're in a male-female relationship, that is. Number 29. Have you ever been in a room with someone of the opposite sex and one of you is arguing that it's too warm or too cold, but you are wearing similar types of clothes? One reason for that is that men generally are warmer than women. One doctor explained it like this: since women have a lower metabolic rate, they tend to produce less heat than men do, which makes them feel colder. Sometimes the difference is quite startling, with one health website writing, "Some studies have shown that while men feel comfortable in rooms with a thermostat set to 72 degrees, women tend to feel comfortable in rooms with a thermostat set to 77. Now we'll ask the question, what on earth is that thing that some people call man flu? Number 28. According to an article in the British Medical Journey, some scientists believe that man flu is nothing but man whining. The paper said despite the universally high incident and prevalence of viral respiratory illness, no scientific review has examined whether the term man flu is appropriately defined or just an ingrained pejorative term with no scientific basis. It's a long paper, but the upshot was that a man's antibody response to the flu could be inferior to a woman's. The paper also highlighted the fact that more men end up in the hospital with the flu, and their bout of the sickness on average lasts longer. This is ongoing research, but there is a possibility that the man is not a wimp and might actually be experiencing a higher level of suffering. Now let's talk about man nips. Number 27. Men in theory can produce milk. That's because their bodies make the hormone oxytocin and prolactin, which are responsible for milk production. Men also have milk ducts, so milk can in theory come out. That means that given the right circumstances, a man could breastfeed. In fact, this is something recorded throughout history. Even the Greek philosopher named Aristotle said men could produce milk if they squeezed their breasts enough. Later in the 19th century, a book called Anomalies and Curiosities of Medicine talked about some real-life cases of men giving their own milk to babies, although these cases are not verified. It could, as we say, happen in theory, but a man's hormone levels would have to be through the roof. Number 26. You might also not know that for a time, young males might have female-looking breasts. A researcher interviewed by the Scientific American said, actually, a significant number of boys around the age of puberty do develop breasts, so the tissue is there, but it regresses. It's a condition called gynecomastia and is related to a hormone imbalance. The good news is that things usually balance and the boy breasts go. That's not always the case though. A man named Merle Yost wrote a book about growing up with breasts where he recounted his years of bullying at school and his final jump to get breast reduction surgery at the age of 33. Number 25. In general, men have less body fat than women. It's thought the reason for women having more body fat is an evolutionary adaptation related to them being able to have children. Number 24. A paper published in the U.S. National Institutes of Health had this to say about male and female natural differences. The results showed that the male teeth were consistently larger than the female teeth. But why? Number 23. It's not always the case, but it's thought that it has something to do with men having more dentine in the crowns of their teeth. Dentine is one of the tissues that make up a tooth. The other parts are the enamel, cementum, and pulp. Now, let's try and settle that old age debate on pain thresholds. Do men feel more pain than women? Number 22. You might have heard this before, with people telling you that women have a higher threshold of pain due to the fact that she's evolved to go through childbirth. The thing is, though, pain is subjective, so it's still hard to measure. In studies where men and women have been subjected to the same pain stimuli, it seems men had a higher pain threshold. The study is actually more complicated as it does take into account that culturally men are expected to not express pain. Number 21. You might also have heard that men have fewer ribs than women. That is utter balderdash, although some people might not have the standard 12 pairs of ribs. Number 20. In some studies, it's written that women generally find men with high testosterone levels more attractive. The good news for all you single guys out there is that single men tend to have higher levels than men who are already with a partner. Number 19. A man's testosterone levels might go up and down within a day, but some men do have higher levels in general. There's also something called irritable male syndrome, which could account for men becoming grumpier in old age because their testosterone levels drop. But as you'll now see, men can get very old and still do the business in the bed. Number 18. There's no age limit for men being able to produce sperm and make a baby. In 2010, it was reported that a guy in India named Ramajit Raghav just had a kid. He was 94. He didn't give up either, having another child just 2 years later. When asked about his secret, he told the British media, "I've been a vegetarian all my life, and I credit my stamina and virility to the diet of vegetables and grains. Being a vegetarian is the secret to my strength and good health." He died in 2020, aged 104. Number 17. Still, the American Society for Reproductive Medicine says male sperm is of a higher quality while men are under the age of 40. In fact, sperm donors are usually asked to be under that age. Number 16. This is one reason why when there's an age gap in a male-to-female relationship, the older person is more often the man. Sure, there are lots of other things to take into account, such as the woman liking a settled-down man who's more likely to be faithful, have money, etc. But one simple fact is some men like younger women because a younger woman from an evolutionary perspective can still procreate. Number 15. Going bald might be some men's worst nightmare, but is it really that bad? Many studies have shown that women like bald men. Trust us, when it comes to being attractive, there are many things that come before your hair. Plus, if you're so insecure and lacking in confidence, well, she might think you're too vain or too weak. In one study, it showed 44% of women were attracted to bald men, but those women were aged 35 to 44. Just 19% of women aged 18 to 24 liked bald guys. Some studies have shown that some women perceive bald men as being more dominant, more masculine, and more successful. Number 14. Studies have shown half of all men will show some amount of male pattern baldness by the time they're 50. Usually it's down to genetics and is related to sex hormones called androgens. Number 13. As we said, this usually starts happening as a man matures, but there are some cases of teenagers going bald naturally. The Guardian talked to a guy named Sam Wolfson. He said he was 16 when his hair started thinning, and then by the time he was in his early 20s, he had only some wispy fuzz on top and 2 bushes at the sides. That's a bit sad, so let's talk about orgasms again. Number 12. The male orgasm is different from a woman's. Guys shoot their load and it seems after that someone has taken all the air out of them. They're like a sex doll that's just been burst. Women, though, have longer orgasms and they're often ready to go again right away. Teen males tend to have more forceful ejaculation, so it's in these years when a guy might fire someplace where he never thought he could reach. What usually comes out is 2 to 5 cubic centimeters of sperm. That's enough to fill a teaspoon at 5 cc's. As for how much in one sitting, it depends on many things such as genetics, mood, prior absence from ejaculating, lifestyle, and general health. In terms of how many rounds men can go, young folks could possibly squeeze out 5 sessions, but older people would likely not go that far. Number 11. With the male orgasm, there's something often called the point of no return. This is called ejaculatory inevitability, and it means the semen's already started making its way to the urethra and is about to experience liftoff. At this point, there will be a series of contractions of the penile muscles in the location of the base of the anus. The pelvis might also start the thrust. Those nerves that have caused the contraction send messages to the brain and everything feels good. Number 10. Before all that happens, a man will need to be aroused. Messages are sent from his spinal cord, and this makes his member stiffen. During this period, he might also let out some liquid from his urethra. This is called pre-ejaculatory fluid, and it's there to affect the pH balance in the urethra. This helps the survival of the sperm to come, but it doesn't contain sperm itself. Once the job is done, the male goes through what scientists call a refractory period. It's basically downtime before he's ready to go again. In a young man, it could be just 10 minutes, but in an older guy, it'll usually be hours. Number 9. Your sperm needs your semen, remember the whole bundle, to get to the egg. Without the rest of the ingredients, it wouldn't get very far at all. But if sperm does take off, it can live inside the woman for up to around 5 days. If it lands somewhere it isn't intended, well, it can only live for a few minutes. Number 8. If you're wondering if you could take a look at sperm, you can't. It's about 1/500th of an inch long, which is around 10,000 times smaller than the egg it wants to meet. Under a microscope, the sperm meeting the egg looks like a tiny spacecraft landing on a vast planet. Number 7. When a woman is ovulating, men can actually pick up on that just by smelling her. Ovulation is when a woman's egg is matured and so has been sent off by the ovary and down the fallopian tubes, where it can wait for one of those lucky sperms to make contact. Number 6. Okay, so what would you think if you read this start to the research paper? Individuals in some species prefer mates carrying dissimilar genes at the major histocompatibility complex, MHC, which may function to increase the MHC or overall heterozygosity of progeny. Yep, that's a bit of a mouthful. What the paper is saying is that women can detect dissimilar genes in men, so by choosing them, their offspring might be healthier. We bet you never thought about that as you moved your stool in the pub closer to a woman. But it gets even more complex. Number 5. Talking to CNN, a scientist said that the egg itself might be able to attract the right kind of sperm. He said human eggs release chemicals called chemoattractants, which leave a sort of chemical breadcrumb trail that sperm use to find unfertilized eggs. Now let's move away from sperm. Number 4. Did you know that guys in general see fewer shades of color? We'll let a scientist explain why. She said this is because retinal cones are on the X chromosome, which men only have one of. Men, however, have more testosterone in their visual cortexes, meaning they sense brightness better than women. Number 3. Something you probably thought we would have talked about already is the male nipple. What's the point of it? The reason men have nipples is that when the embryo is forming, males and females are pretty much the same. They share the same blueprint, which is the reason all humans look alike in terms of basic structure. But after around 7 weeks of gestation, the gene of the Y chromosome makes some changes and the testes start to form. It's then that little bundle of blood starts producing testosterone. But that doesn't mean the nipples have to go. What would be the point in losing them? They aren't doing anyone any harm. Number 2. Another thing men might not need is that thing we call foreskin. After all, in some cultures they get rid of it. Is that the right thing to do? In a paper called Vital or Vestigial, the foreskin has its fans and foes. The writer cites some scientists who have called the foreskin the floppy disk of the male anatomy, meaning it is no longer needed. If you think about it, men have very long time ago might have wanted to walk around with the penis hanging out, and that can mean some damage being caused to this Jonah Hill. This is really bad news in evolutionary terms because the only real reason we're here is to make other people, so the foreskin acted as a protective shield. It could also act as a lubricant back then and now. Number 1. This is personal. When the writer was a kid, he kept hearing boys talk about their balls dropping, as if one day those things just went plop and fell down. It never happened, but his balls looked fine as they were. Still, he was concerned. For many kids waiting for their balls to drop, it can be quite worrying if nothing seems to be happening. Actually, there is no sudden drop at all when the child is already grown. Balls don't really drop. They're tight to the body for sure when men are younger, and then when a boy matures and he produces more testosterone, his balls get larger, and it might seem like they're lower at that point. Nipples. Almost everyone has them, regardless of gender. They allow mothers to feed their babies and they can help steam things up a bit in the bedroom. But like every other part of the human body, nipples can be downright weird. On this episode of the Infographic Show, we're looking at weird facts about male nipples. The reason both men and women have nipples is due to how the embryo forms. Several genes determine if a baby is male or female. There's the SRY gene, or sex-determining region Y, which lives on the short arm of the Y chromosome. It's activated when the embryo is about 7 weeks old, and it'll lead to the development of male reproductive organs, while female reproductive organs will disappear. Breasts and nipples form before the SRY gene activates. That's why, regardless of your sex, almost everyone has nipples and a mammary ridge. Now that you have a quick rundown, let's talk about nipples and men. Male nipples can lactate. It's rare, but it definitely happens. Generally, men don't produce enough prolactin, the hormone that stimulates the mammary glands to produce milk. It's not unheard of for prolactin levels to surge in men, though. This can result from hypothyroidism, since it impacts the pituitary gland. Prolactin production in men can also be triggered by medications, like antipsychotics, chlorpromazine, steroids, and heart medication digoxin. It can also occur when men take estrogen or prolactin. If you want to know how to make yourself lactate, there's not a lot of research on the matter. There's also not a ton of research on whether or not the milk that men produce has similar nutritional or immunity-boosting properties as women's breast milk. In one study that has been done, one man who did produce breast milk showed that it had the same concentrations of lactose, proteins, and electrolytes as the colostrum and milk from lactating women. Dr. Chandani Dejour, a neonatal and pediatric hospitalist at Lucile Packard Children's Hospital at Stanford University, said, "There's no evidence to suggest colostrum between cisgender women and other breastfeeding, chest-feeding parents would be different. Nipples can be sensitive. While a lot of people don't consider a man's nipples to be an erogenous zone, nipple stimulation can activate the same parts of the brain as genital stimulation, helping intensify sexual arousal." In a study performed by the Journal of Sexual Medicine, they used magnetic resonance imaging, or MRI, to note which areas of the brain become active when women touched various parts of their bodies. The genital sensing brain areas in women roughly correspond to the same areas in men. According to Rutgers University psychologist Barry Komisarek, the nipple finding was a surprise. "My speculation is that this could be the basis for many women saying that nipple stimulation is erotogenic because it stimulates the same area as the genitals." Nipples can chafe and bleed during physical activity. Runners already know this one, though. If you're familiar with marathons, you might have witnessed a male runner or two with red streaks running down their chest. Chafing appears to be just a part of a runner's life, the result of friction from skin rubbing against itself or clothing. As men run, their nipples can rub against their shirts and start to bleed. This can happen during other strenuous activities too. If you're a runner and you want to avoid chafing, here are some ideas. If you're able to, take off your shirt or at least try to pull your shirt away from your nipples. It's not efficient, but it can help combat chafing and avoid nipple bleeding. If the damage is already done, you can apply hydrogen peroxide to your nipples after the race. It'll sting, but it'll help. Then apply some antibiotic ointment and put a bandage or gauze over it. If you run often, you might want to invest in nipple guards. Regular bandages might come off when you sweat, but there are nipple guards made for this specific purpose. You should also avoid cotton and wear synthetic or moisture-wicking fabrics. This will minimize irritation. And most importantly, stay hydrated. Hydration can reduce the risk of chafing. When you're dehydrated, it's more difficult for your body to flush away salts from your skin. If you drink plenty of water before, during, and after, you'll be able to sweat freely and it won't dry into salt crystals, which will irritate your skin. Did you know that 1% of men have a third nipple? They're also known as supernumerary nipples. The third nipple, or polymastia or polythelia, is a condition where you can have one or more extra nipples on your body. It's estimated that only about 200,000 Americans have one or more extra nipples, and even though people will only normally have an extra nipple, it is possible to have up to 8. It's also a lot more common in men than in women, most commonly appearing along the, quote, milk line, the area that goes from your armpit and goes down through and past your nipples to your genitals. The best way to tell a third nipple apart from a mole is that third nipples usually have a nipple-like bump on them. While most extra nipples will appear on your milk line, they can also appear anywhere on your body, including hands and feet. If they appear outside of the milk line, they're called an ectopic supernumerary nipple, all of which fall into 6 different categories. Category 1 is when the nipple has an areola around it and it usually has breast tissue underneath it. The areola is that small circular area of pigmented skin around the nipple. For Category 2, the nipple will have breast tissue under it, but it doesn't have an areola. A Category 3 nipple will have breast tissue, but doesn't have a nipple. Category 4 is when there's breast tissue but the areola and nipple are absent. Category 5, or pseudomama, has an areola around it but it just has fat tissue instead of breast tissue. Oh, and how could we possibly forget about Category 6, or polythelia, which will have the nipple appear by itself with no areola or breast tissue. But why do third nipples appear? It all goes back to the embryo. During the 4th week of pregnancy, the milk lines thicken. The milk line is made up of rigid ectoderm tissue, which is tissue that'll become part of your skin. Typically, the milk line stays thick and forms the nipples while the rest of the skin softens. But if it doesn't become regular ectoderm tissue, supernumerary nipples can appear where the tissue remains thick. This is how you can end up with a third nipple. You can have your third nipple removed, but they're mostly harmless. They don't indicate any underlying conditions, and typically they're removed for cosmetic reasons. They can lactate just like your regular nipples, though. You may have noticed that the media usually censors female nipples, while male nipples are allowed to run free. Female nipples have always been made a lot more controversial than male nipples. There have only been a few documented concerns about male nipples, and one of those instances can be traced back to Japan. In 2015, Japan was dealing with insufferably high summer temperatures. As a result, men began to take off their undershirts to beat the heat. Goo, a Japanese search engine, conducted a survey that asked what kind of fashion trend women hate to see from men. The winner was sura-chikubi, meaning see-through nipples. Some women even considered it to be sexual harassment, although it's unclear if it actually meets Japan's legal requirements to be considered sexual harassment. This might be why Japan has a summertime industry of nipple concealers for men. Outside of that, nipple censorship is typically reserved for women. Michael Bronski, a professor in the practice of activism and media studies of women, gender, and sexuality at Harvard University, explained, male nudes with nipples and genitals were often meant to embody virtues such as patriotism, steadfastness, moral and emotional strength. Female nudes were more sexualized even as they represented female virtues such as modesty. And of course, statues of women that were not nude, often goddesses or monsters such as Medusa, represented male qualities, wisdom in the case of Athena, or male fear of castration such as Medusa. Men can get breast cancer. It's rare, but at least 2,400 men are diagnosed with breast cancer every year. Since everyone is born with at least some breast tissue, that means anyone can get breast cancer. When it does happen to men, it's usually in older men, but it can happen at any age. Never assume you could not get breast cancer because you were a man. For male breast cancer, doctors will typically treat it with surgery to remove the breast tissue. It can also be treated with chemotherapy or radiation therapy. Stay vigilant, and if you notice the signs, check with your doctor. It's always better to be safe than sorry. Symptoms might include a painless lump or thickening of the skin on the chest. In the early stages, you might even notice changes to the skin on your chest. This can be dimpling, puckering, scaling, or even changes in color. Changes in the nipple structure can also be a sign of breast cancer, including skin color or scaling. In rare cases, nipples can even begin to turn inward. If you notice discharge or bleeding from your nipple, it might be a sign of cancer. If you're experiencing any of these symptoms, make an appointment with your doctor immediately. If you're a male, it might not be statistically likely to be cancer, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't be mindful. Nobody really knows what causes male breast cancer. We do know it starts when the cells in the breast tissue develop and changes in their DNA occur. In healthy cells, DNA tells your body to grow and multiply at a set rate and to die at a set time. When cancer cells develop, they change the DNA's instructions. These cells begin to multiply a lot faster than normal cells while continuing to live for longer compared to healthy cells. This causes an overabundance of cells, leading to the creation of a tumor, which can invade and destroy healthy body tissue. Over time, cancer cells can spread to other parts of the body, which is known as metastatic cancer. There are a few types of breast cancer that can develop in men. Ductal carcinoma begins in milk ducts, or the tubes that connect to the nipple. It's the most common type of breast cancer in men. Lobular carcinoma begins in the milk-producing glands, also known as lobules. Men typically have less lobular cells, so this type of breast cancer is a lot less common in males. There are other types of cancer to watch out for, like Paget's disease of the nipple and inflammatory breast cancer. Paget's disease of the nipple, or Paget's disease of the breast, is a rare form of breast cancer. It starts on the nipple and expands to the areola, but normally affects males over the age of 50, and those diagnosed with it typically have underlying ductal breast cancer. In most cases, it rarely is confined to just the nipple. Possible signs of Paget's disease of the nipple can include flaky or scaly skin on the nipple, crusty, oozing, or hardened skin on the nipple, areola, or both, itching, redness, tingling or burning sensation, straw-colored or bloody nipple discharge, a flattened or inverted nipple, a lump in the breast, or a thickening on the breast. If you happen to be familiar with Paget's disease of the bone, these two diseases are not related. Men can develop gynecomastia, an increase in the amount of breast gland tissue in males. It's typically caused by an imbalance of estrogen and testosterone, and it can affect one or both breasts. Some men develop gynecomastia as newborns, during puberty, or as they get older as a part of normal changes in hormone levels. While it isn't a serious problem, it can be difficult for some men to cope with the condition. It's common to experience pain in the breasts, but it might also make some men feel embarrassed or self-conscious. It can go away on its own, but it can also be treated with medication or surgery. Gynecomastia can also result in puffy or pointy nipples in men. The enlarged tissue will push the nipple and areola outward, and that's what causes it to look puffy or larger than average. Since it's unrelated to chest muscle, men may find that the puffy nipples don't go away even if they lose weight or work out. Men can also experience inverted or oversized nipples. Inverted nipples can cause discomfort, and they can impact self-confidence. Fortunately, this can be corrected through plastic surgery. The process involves the doctor releasing underlying tissue so that it'll point outward like an average nipple. Did you know a man holds the world record for the heaviest weight lifted by nipples? A man known as the Baron is in the Guinness Book of World Records for having lifted 71.87 pounds or 32.6 kilograms with his nipples. The Baron, who is originally from Finland, achieved this on July 19, 2013 at Bush Hall in London, England. In fact, quite a few nipple-related world records are currently held by men. Sage Werbach, or the Great Nippolini, holds the official Guinness World Record for heaviest vehicle pushed by nipples. He was able to pull a 2,179.27 pound or 988.5 kilogram vehicle for 65.62 feet or 20 meters. The event took place on March 25, 2011 on the set of Lo Show de Record in Milan, Italy. And let's not forget Daniele Tuveri, a man from Italy who holds the world record for the longest nipple hair. In March 2013, his areola hair measured at around 6.69 inches, or 17 centimeters. If you are thinking about trying to beat their records, remember that there is an age restriction. You can only receive the record title if you're 16 years of age or older. The Montgomery glands in the nipples were named after a man. Montgomery glands are also known as tubercles and are small sebaceous glands found in the nipple and areola. They secrete an oily or waxy substance that's meant to help lubricate the skin. They're meant to help prevent sore and cracked nipples while breastfeeding, as well as protect babies from germs, and can even guide babies to latch onto the breast through scent. Irish obstetrician William Featherstone Montgomery was the first to describe the areola papule back in 1837. It may not be so shocking that a man would be the first to name them, especially since women were often barred from being involved in the medical sciences for centuries. But men have Montgomery glands too, as the nipple and areola are formed before sexual dimorphism occurs. Male nipples are subject to weird and unexpected injuries, possibly due to the fact that they stick out. In Muskogee, Oklahoma in 2015, Leonard Overcash was helping out a coworker with some yard work when the unexpected happened. A zebra bit off part of his nipple. The zebra had been watching him from behind a nearby fence before reaching out to bite him. Although it is illegal to own an exotic animal in Muskogee, the owner had the zebra for 10 years, claiming that she didn't know she wasn't allowed to have him. According to the owner, she had asked city officials if she needed a permit and received a resounding no. Prior to the whole nipple-biting incident, the zebra hadn't caused any problems. The owner had to pay the man's medical bills, and she was given 30 days to rehome the zebra. Overcash said that the ordeal was painful and traumatizing, but it wasn't long before he was doing much better and he had gotten back to work. Sometimes it takes a little more than mere lost nipples to keep a good man down. Now check out Weird Facts About Testicles, or watch Weird Facts About the Male Body.